When Victoria Hale walked into that Manhattan cafe expecting another forgettable blind date, she had no idea that within the hour, she'd be staring down the barrel of a gun, saved by the very man she'd spent 30 minutes destroying with her words. The calloused hands she'd mocked would become the only thing standing between her and death. The quiet single father she'd dismissed as beneath her would reveal a past so dangerous, so trained in violence, that her billions would mean absolutely nothing. This is the story of the worst first date that ever happened, and the only one that truly mattered. If you're ready to hear how arrogance met survival, how a blind date became a battlefield, and how two broken people found something worth protecting, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The late September afternoon painted Manhattan in shades of amber and shadow, the kind of light that made everything look more expensive than it was. The Meridian Cafe sat tucked between Fifth Avenue boutiques, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stage for the city's elite to perform their carefully curated lives. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars, Victoria Hale checked her watch for the third time in as many minutes. 4:27 p.m. 3 minutes late. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her charcoal Tom Ford suit, the fabric so fine it might as well have been woven from her own ambition. At 36, Victoria had built Hale Investments into a $9 billion empire through a combination of ruthless intelligence and an almost supernatural ability to identify weakness in both markets and people. Her dark hair was pulled into a flawless chignon, her makeup applied with surgical precision, her entire presentation a declaration of control. The blind date had been Margaret's idea. Margaret Chen, her college roommate, and the only person still brave enough to suggest that Victoria's personal life resembled a wasteland. "He's different from your usual type," Margaret had said over lunch 2 weeks ago, which should have been Victoria's first warning. Victoria's usual type was venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, men who understood that relationships were strategic partnerships with measurable returns on investment. "Different how?" Victoria had asked, already composing her refusal. "He's real," Margaret had said simply. "Just give him 2 hours. That's all I'm asking." Which was how Victoria found herself occupying a corner table at the Meridian, watching pedestrians rush past on the street below, already calculating how quickly she could extract herself from whatever catastrophe Margaret had arranged. She dressed for intimidation, the suit, the Louboutin, the Cartier watch that cost what some families spent on a car. If this man was different, she'd make sure he understood exactly what league he wasn't playing in. At 4:30 precisely, the cafe door opened. Victoria's first impression was confirmation of her worst suspicions. The man who entered wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark jeans, clean but worn, and a simple gray Henley shirt that had seen better days. Work boots, not Italian leather. No watch she could see, no designer anything, no signal that he understood the arena he'd just entered. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair slightly too long to be professionally cut, and a build that suggested physical work rather than gym memberships. As he scanned the cafe, his eyes, gray, she noted, held something she couldn't quite name. Wariness, maybe, or assessment. When his gaze found her, she saw the moment of recognition. Margaret must have shown him a photo. He walked toward her table with a quiet confidence that irritated her immediately. Confidence required credentials, and nothing about his appearance suggested he'd earned any. "Victoria?" His voice was low, careful. "I'm Ryan Brooks." She didn't stand, didn't extend her hand, just gestured to the chair across from her with the kind of casual dismissal usually reserved for waitstaff. "You're late. Traffic on the bridge." He sat down slowly as if testing the chair's stability. "I apologize." "The bridge." She let the words hang there, laden with implication. "You don't live in Manhattan. Queens, Jackson Heights." He said it without shame, which somehow made it worse. Victoria allowed herself a small, cold smile. How economical. Something flickered in his expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of careful neutrality that people developed when they were used to absorbing insults. He reached for the water glass in front of him, and she noticed his hands, They were large, scarred across the knuckles, with calluses that spoke of manual labor. The nails were clean but short, practical. Working man's hands. She'd seen enough. I'm going to be direct, Ryan, because I respect efficiency, and I assume you do too, given your circumstances. She leaned back slightly, creating physical distance to match her emotional detachment. Margaret means well, but she has a romanticized notion of compatibility that doesn't account for practical realities. You and I exist in fundamentally different worlds. We're sitting in the same cafe, he said quietly. Are we? She gestured around them at the Art Deco fixtures and the clientele in their designer everything. This is my world. Literally, I have standing reservations here. I'm guessing you looked at the menu outside and recalculated your budget for the month. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I can afford a cup of coffee. Can you? She let her gaze drift pointedly to his worn boots, his faded shirt. Because I'm looking at someone who probably took the subway here, who works with his hands, construction, maintenance, and who thought showing up in work clothes was appropriate for a first date at a place where the average entree costs $60. I work in building maintenance, he said evenly. At a hospital in Queens, I fix things when they break. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, whatever's needed. Victoria actually laughed, a sharp sound that drew glances from nearby tables. A janitor. Margaret set me up with a janitor. Maintenance engineer, he corrected, but there was no heat in it. Just that same careful neutrality, like he was stating facts for a report. Of course! How foolish of me to use the wrong title. She signaled their waiter, a young man who materialized instantly at her table. Espresso, please. Single origin, medium roast. Then, as an afterthought, she glanced at Ryan. And for you? Regular coffee, I assume? Just water's fine, Ryan said to the waiter, who nodded and retreated. Victoria shook her head slowly, as if witnessing something both predictable and disappointing. You can't even order coffee. Let me guess, you saw the prices and did the math. What is it, $8 for a cappuccino? That's probably an hour of your wages. Something like that. His voice remained level, but his hands had moved from the table to his lap, she noticed, removing themselves from her line of fire. So why are you here? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Surely you know this is absurd. Look at you, look at me. What exactly did you think was going to happen? That I'd be charmed by your blue-collar authenticity? That I'd find your poverty noble somehow? For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not anger, she'd have respected anger, but something sadder. Resignation, maybe. Margaret said you were smart and successful. She said you worked hard for everything you have. She thought we might understand each other. Understand each other? Victoria tasted the words like they were spoiled. I run a $9 billion investment firm. I have 347 employees across 6 offices worldwide. I negotiate with senators and CEOs and people who move markets with their phone calls. You fix toilets. Somebody has to. The simple truth of it infuriated her. Yes, somebody does. Somebody whose aspirations topped out at a steady paycheck and benefits. Don't mistake necessity for virtue, Ryan. You do what you do because you lack the intelligence, ambition, or education to do anything else. The waiter returned with her espresso, the cup and saucer positioned perfectly on the marble table. Victoria didn't acknowledge him, didn't break eye contact with Ryan, who was watching her with those steady gray eyes that revealed nothing. When they were alone again, he spoke. You don't know anything about me. I know everything I need to know. She lifted the espresso cup, inhaled the aroma, notes of chocolate and cherry, exactly as she preferred. I know you're a single father. Margaret mentioned that, as if it was some kind of selling point rather than evidence of poor life choices. I know you work a job that requires no degree, no specialized skills, nothing that couldn't be learned in a few weeks of on-the-job training. I know you live in Queens, probably in a rent-controlled apartment that you're terrified of losing, paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from catastrophe. She sipped the espresso, let the bitterness coat her tongue. And I know that you came here today despite knowing you were completely out of your depth, probably because Margaret guilt-tripped you, or because you were curious about what someone like me even looks like in person. Well, here I am. Look your fill. This is what success looks like when you actually work for it instead of settling for mediocrity. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Then he said, Are you finished? The question surprised her. There was no anger in it, no wounded pride, just a simple inquiry, as if he was waiting for a meeting to conclude. It should have satisfied her, this evidence of his defeat, but instead it irritated her further. Does the truth hurt? She pressed. Is this the part where you get defensive, where you tell me that money isn't everything, and there's dignity and hard work and other platitudes that poor people tell themselves to feel better about their situations? No. He shifted slightly in his chair, and she noticed he was sitting in a way that gave him a clear view of both the cafe entrance and the emergency exit near the kitchen. Odd positioning for someone who should be focused entirely on her. This is the part where I wonder what happened to you. Victoria felt her spine straighten, her fingers tighten on the espresso cup. Excuse me? Margaret talked about you a lot before she set this up, Ryan said, his voice still that same measured calm. She told me you grew up in poverty, that your dad left when you were 6, that your mom worked 3 jobs to keep you fed, that you got into Columbia on a full scholarship and graduated top of your class despite having to work nights and weekends to pay for books and food. She said you built your company from nothing, that you understood struggle. Each word landed like a small explosion in Victoria's chest, detonating memories she'd buried under layers of silk and success. What's your point? My point is that somewhere between there and here, you forgot what it felt like. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to close some of the distance between them. You forgot what it's like to count change for the subway, to choose between eating and paying the electric bill, to work 3 jobs and still come up short. And instead of remembering with compassion, you turned it into a weapon. You made it to the top, and now you use that achievement to look down on everyone who's still climbing. Victoria's hand trembled slightly, and she set down the espresso cup before he could see. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Something in his voice had changed, still quiet, but with an edge now. I see someone who's worked so hard to distance herself from where she came from that she can't even recognize her own reflection anymore. Someone so terrified of being vulnerable that she attacks first, hits the hardest, makes sure everyone knows she's untouchable. I'm not terrified of anything, but her voice had lost some of its steel. Everyone's terrified of something. Ryan glanced toward the entrance again, that same odd scanning motion, then back to her. The difference is whether you let that fear make you cruel. She wanted to eviscerate him with words, to find the weakest point in his armor and drive her criticism through it like a blade. But before she could formulate her attack, she noticed something that stopped her cold. His attention wasn't fully on her. Even as they spoke, even as he held her gaze and responded to her barbs, part of his awareness was elsewhere. Scanning, assessing. His body language had shifted in the last few minutes, still relaxed to casual observation. But there was a coiled quality to it now, like a spring compressed and waiting. Are you even listening to me? She demanded. I'm listening. But his eyes had moved past her shoulder, tracking something in the cafe behind her. Keep talking. The presumption of it, the sheer audacity of this maintenance worker telling her what to do, should have unleashed her full fury. Instead, something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't dismissive, it was tactical. What are you... 3 men, he said softly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Came in 4 minutes ago. 1 by the front entrance, 1 near the kitchen, 1 by the bathroom hallway. They're positioned to control the exits. Victoria felt ice slide down her spine. What are you talking about? Don't turn around. His hand moved across the table, not to touch her, but to gesture. Small, contained, a signal to stay still. The one by the entrance has a bulge under his jacket, left side, probably a gun. The other 2 are carrying bags that are too rigid to be gym equipment. This was insane. This was Ryan trying to distract her from his humiliation, creating some kind of elaborate scenario to shift the power dynamic. You're being ridiculous. This is Manhattan. There are always... Victoria. He said her name with such quiet authority that she stopped mid-sentence. I need you to listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, something bad is going to happen in this cafe. When it does, I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? She stared at him, searching for the joke, the game, the manipulation. But his face was absolutely serious, his body language radiating a kind of controlled tension she'd never seen before. This wasn't the defeated janitor she'd been verbally dismantling. This was someone else entirely. "You're scaring me," she said, and hated how true it was. "Good." His eyes moved past her again, tracking, calculating. "Fear keeps you alert. Now when I move, I need you to drop to the floor and get behind the counter. Don't stop, don't look back, don't try to help. Just get behind cover and stay down until..." The sound of shattering glass cut through the ambient cafe noise like a gunshot. Victoria's heart seized in her chest as she whipped around, her training and instincts, or lack thereof, making her do exactly what Ryan had told her not to do. She looked. The man by the entrance had drawn a gun, sleek, black, terrifyingly real, and fired a round into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down on the screaming patrons. The two other men Ryan had identified pulled weapons from their bags, military-grade rifles that looked like they belonged in war zones, not Manhattan cafes. "Everybody down!" the man by the entrance shouted, his accent thick, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "Hands where we can see! Nobody moves, nobody dies!" The cafe erupted into chaos, screaming, crying, the crash of overturned chairs and dropped dishes. A woman near the window tried to run and was grabbed by the man near the kitchen, thrown roughly to the ground. A businessman fumbled for his phone and had it kicked from his hand, the screen shattering against the marble floor. Victoria couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her entire worldview, the one built on control and power and the certainty that money insulated her from the world's ugliness, shattered as completely as that phone screen. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not to her. "Victoria," Ryan's voice cut through her paralysis like a lifeline. "Look at me." She tore her eyes from the gunman and found his face. Calm. Steady. Absolutely unfazed by the weapons and the screaming and the violence crackling through the air like electricity. "You're gonna be okay," he said, and incredibly, impossibly, she believed him. "But I need you to move. Now!" He rose from his chair in one fluid motion, positioning his body between her and the nearest gunman. His hand, that scarred, calloused hand she'd mocked, extended toward her, palm up, offering. Victoria took it. The moment her fingers touched his, the world shifted. He pulled her down and forward in one smooth motion, using the table as cover as they moved toward the counter. Around them, other patrons were dropping to the floor, some sobbing, some frozen in shock. The air smelled like fear and expensive perfume and the acrid bite of gunpowder. "Behind the counter," Ryan urged, his body still shielding hers. "Get behind it and stay low." "What about you?" The question came out strangled, barely words. "I'll be fine." He met her eyes one more time, and she saw something in them that terrified her more than the guns. Certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who'd done this before. "Trust me." Then he was gone, moving away from her and toward the center of the cafe with a purposeful stride that defied every survival instinct screaming at him to hide. Victoria scrambled behind the counter, her Louboutins skidding on the polished floor, her perfect suit jacket torn at the shoulder. She crouched beside a young barista, college-aged, crying silently, mascara streaming down her face, and watched through a gap in the counter as Ryan walked directly into the line of fire. "You!" One of the gunmen, the leader, she guessed, the one who'd shot the ceiling, pointed his weapon at Ryan. "On the ground, now!" Ryan stopped walking, but didn't get down. He stood there, hands visible, but not raised, his posture relaxed in a way that seemed almost insulting given the circumstances. "You don't want to do this." The gunman actually laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "I don't want to? You see my gun, yes? You see my friends? We do exactly what we want." "I see 3 men with weapons and tactical training making a lot of noise in a cafe full of witnesses in the middle of Manhattan," Ryan said calmly. "What I don't see is an exit strategy that ends with you getting what you want and walking away alive." The cafe had gone eerily quiet, the screaming reduced to muffled sobs and frightened breathing. Every eye was on Ryan and the gunman, watching the impossible unfold. A maintenance worker in worn jeans standing up to armed robbers like he was discussing plumbing repairs. The gunman's expression darkened. "You think you're a hero? You think you save everyone?" "I think you're desperate," Ryan said, and his voice held something Victoria had never heard from him before: command. "And I think desperate people make bad choices. But you can still walk away from this. Nobody's hurt yet. The security response time for this address is 6 minutes. You've been here for 3. That gives you 3 minutes to leave before NYPD shows up with tactical units and turns this into a situation you can't walk away from." "How you know security response time?" The gunman's eyes narrowed, his weapon steadying on Ryan's chest. "Because I know things." Ryan's gaze shifted slightly, taking in all 3 gunmen, calculating distances and positions with the same precision he'd used earlier when Victoria thought he was being paranoid. "Same way I know you're not professional criminals. Professional crews don't hit cafes in broad daylight, don't corner themselves in buildings with one entrance, don't bring more firepower than they need. You're either amateurs who watch too many movies, or you're here for something specific that has nothing to do with the cash register." The gunman's finger twitched on the trigger, and Victoria's breath caught in her throat. This was insane. Ryan was going to get himself killed. And for what? To prove something to the janitor turned hero? To impress her after she'd spent half an hour destroying him? "You talk too much," the gunman said. "I'm trying to save your life." Ryan took a small step forward, his hands still visible, still not raised in surrender. "Because in about 90 seconds, when those sirens start, and they will, you're going to have to make a choice: hostages or escape. You can't have both. And if you choose hostages, if you make this a standoff, you're not walking out of here. You're getting carried out in a bag." "You think I'm afraid to shoot you?" "I think you came here for a reason that had nothing to do with killing civilians in a cafe." Another step forward. Ryan was close enough now that Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight was distributed on the balls of his feet, ready to move, to act, to do something that her mind couldn't even comprehend. "I think you're scared, and you're in over your head, and you're trying to figure out how this went wrong so fast." The second gunman, the one near the kitchen, spoke rapidly in Russian to the leader. Victoria didn't speak the language, but she could hear the panic in his voice, the argument happening in real time. The leader's face twisted with anger and something else. Fear, she realized. Ryan was right. These men were terrified. "We came for her," the leader suddenly said, swinging his weapon away from Ryan and pointing it directly at Victoria's hiding place behind the counter. "The rich bitch! Hale. We came for Victoria Hale." The world tilted sideways. Victoria's vision narrowed to a tunnel, everything peripheral falling away except that gun barrel pointing at her, the black hole that could end her life. This was about her. These men had come here specifically to... what? Kidnap her? Kill her? Some business deal gone wrong. Some investment that destroyed the wrong lives. Some consequence she'd never considered because consequences were for other people. "No," Ryan said, and his voice had changed completely. No more negotiation, no more calm reasoning. This was command, absolute and unquestionable. "You want her. You go through me." He moved. Victoria would remember that moment for the rest of her life. The moment Ryan Brooks, single father and maintenance engineer from Queens, transformed into someone else entirely. He moved with a speed and precision that defied his earlier calm, closing the distance to the leader before the man could shift his aim. His hand came up in a strike that looked almost lazy in its economy, connecting with the gunman's wrist and sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The leader tried to fight back, throwing a punch that would have connected with anyone else. But Ryan wasn't there anymore. He'd shifted his weight, redirected the momentum, and suddenly the gunman was on the ground, gasping, Ryan's knee on his spine and his arm twisted at an angle that made Victoria's stomach turn. "Drop your weapons," Ryan said to the other 2 gunmen, his voice eerily calm even as he held their leader immobilized. "Drop them now, and you can still walk away from this." The second gunman raised his rifle, and time seemed to slow. Victoria saw it happening, saw the decision forming, the trajectory of violence that would end with Ryan dead on the cafe floor, and something inside her broke. Not her fear, not her control, but the fundamental belief that she was separate from this, protected by her money and status from the raw chaos of the world. She rose from behind the counter, her voice finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "No! Stop!" The second gunman's attention shifted to her for just a fraction of a second, his aim wavering, and Ryan moved again. This time he released the leader, rolling forward in a motion so fluid it looked rehearsed, coming up inside the second gunman's reach before the man could fire. Another disarm, this one faster, more brutal. The rifle clattered away. The gunman went down hard, his head connecting with the table edge with a sickening crack. The third gunman, the one who'd been stationed by the bathroom, made his choice. He ran straight through the emergency exit near the kitchen, abandoning his companions, his weapon, everything. The cafe was silent except for ragged breathing and distant sirens growing closer. Ryan stood in the center of the room, two incapacitated gunmen at his feet, his gray Henley torn and bloodied at the shoulder where one of them must have connected with a strike Victoria hadn't even seen. He wasn't even breathing hard. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since the violence started, Victoria saw genuine emotion in his expression. Concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, mute, everything she'd said earlier, every cruel word, every dismissal, every assumption echoing in her head like accusations. The leader groaned on the floor, trying to rise, and Ryan put a boot on his shoulder. Gentle pressure, just enough to keep him down. "Stay." "You're dead," the man spat, blood on his lips from where his face had hit the marble. "You don't know who you're—" "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Ryan said quietly. "Same way you're about to know exactly who you tried to kidnap and exactly what kind of person stepped between you and her." The sirens were deafening now, multiple units converging on the cafe. Through the windows, Victoria could see NYPD vehicles blocking off the street, officers emerging with weapons drawn, moving with the kind of precision that suggested tactical training. Ryan raised his hand slowly, making himself non-threatening as police burst through the entrance, shouting commands. "Two suspects down, non-lethal force," he called out clearly. "Third suspect fled through rear exit approximately 90 seconds ago, heading east. Civilians are frightened but mostly unharmed. I'm the one who engaged the suspects. I'm going to kneel now and put my hands behind my head." He did exactly that, smooth and controlled, like he'd done it 100 times before. The police swarmed in, securing the gunmen, checking civilians, establishing a perimeter. A female officer approached Victoria, asking questions she couldn't process. Checking her for injuries her body was too shocked to register. The whole time her eyes stayed locked on Ryan, kneeling on the floor with his hands behind his head, calmly answering an officer's questions. "Who are you?" one of the cops asked him. "Ryan Brooks. I work maintenance at Queens General." "You military?" A pause so brief Victoria almost missed it. "Used to be." "What unit?" Another pause. "That's classified." The cop studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. He helped Ryan to his feet, treating him less like a suspect and more like a colleague. "You did good work here. Probably saved lives." Ryan's eyes found Victoria's across the chaos of the cafe. Just did what needed doing. As paramedics moved through the space, treating minor injuries and checking for shock, as police took statements and secured evidence, as the reality of what had almost happened settled over the room like a heavy blanket, Victoria remained behind the counter. Not because she was hiding anymore, but because her legs literally wouldn't hold her. The worst blind date of her life had become something else entirely, and the man she'd spent 30 minutes destroying with her words had just proven that everything, every assumption, every judgment, every cruel observation had been devastatingly, completely wrong. The paramedic's flashlight beam cut across Victoria's eyes for the third time, and she forced herself not to flinch. Her body felt disconnected from her mind, operating on some autopilot that allowed her to answer questions. No, she wasn't hurt. Yes, she could follow the light with her eyes. No, she didn't need to go to the hospital, while her thoughts spiraled in directions she couldn't control. "Ma'am, you're in shock," the paramedic said gently. She was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes that had probably seen too much trauma for her age. "It's completely normal. Your body's processing what just happened. I'd really recommend—" "I'm fine." Victoria's voice came out sharper than she intended, the old armor snapping back into place even as her hands trembled against her thighs. "I need to speak with the police. I need to understand why those men—" "Ms. Hale!" A detective approached, his shield clipped to his belt, his expression professionally neutral. He was older, maybe 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of seeing humanity at its worst. "I'm Detective Marcus Chen. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here today." Victoria nodded, grateful for something concrete to focus on, questions she could answer, facts she could control. "Of course. Whatever you need." Detective Chen glanced at the paramedic, who reluctantly stepped back to give them space. He pulled over a chair, one of the cafe's expensive velvet seats, now askew from the chaos, and sat down across from Victoria, his notepad open. "First, are you physically injured in any way?" "No." "Can you tell me what you were doing at the Meridian Cafe this afternoon?" "I was meeting someone. A blind date." The words felt absurd now, ridiculous. A blind date that had turned into an attempted kidnapping. "Ryan Brooks. We were supposed to have coffee." "And you'd never met Mr. Brooks before today?" "No. A friend set it up. Margaret Chen. Any relation?" A flicker of something crossed the detective's face. "My sister, actually. Small world." He made a note. "Did Mr. Brooks say or do anything unusual before the suspects entered the cafe?" Victoria's mind flashed back to those moments before the glass shattered, to Ryan's sudden alertness, the way he'd tracked the gunmen's movements before they'd even revealed themselves. He noticed them, before they pulled weapons, before anything happened. He saw them positioning themselves and knew something was wrong. How did he know? "I don't know." She realized she was gripping the edge of the counter hard enough to hurt, and forced her fingers to relax. He said they were controlling the exits. He told me to stay calm, that something bad was about to happen. I thought he was being paranoid or trying to distract me from... She stopped abruptly, unwilling to voice what she'd been doing before the world exploded. "From what, Ms. Hale?" Victoria met his eyes, and something about his steady professional gaze made her tell the truth. "From the fact that I was being cruel to him. I spent the first half hour of our date telling him he was beneath me, that he was poor and uneducated and completely unsuitable. I was trying to end the date as quickly as possible when he noticed the gunmen." Detective Chen's expression didn't change, but she saw understanding flicker there. "And after the suspects revealed themselves?" "He protected me." The words came out quieter than she intended. "He put himself between me and their guns. He disarmed 2 of them with his bare hands. He told them to leave before the police arrived, tried to give them an out even though they'd come here to..." Her voice caught. "They came here for me. The leader said they came for me specifically. Why would they do that?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Detective Chen flipped a page in his notebook. "Do you have any enemies, Ms. Hale? Anyone who might want to harm you or use you for ransom?" Victoria almost laughed, but it came out as something broken. "I run a $9 billion investment firm. I've destroyed companies, restructured others, put people out of work in the name of efficiency and profit margins. I have hundreds of enemies, thousands maybe. People who lost their jobs, their investments, their futures because of decisions I made. But to actually come after me physically? To try to kidnap me?" She shook her head. "That requires a different kind of hatred, or desperation." "We'll need a list of your recent business dealings," Detective Chen said. "Particularly any that involved foreign entities or individuals who might have connections to Eastern European organized crime." The words sent ice through her veins. "Organized crime? You think this was..." The suspects are being questioned now, but preliminary identification suggests they have ties to a Russian criminal organization operating in Brighton Beach. "We're working to determine if this was a kidnapping for ransom, retaliation for a business dispute, or something else entirely." He paused, studying her face. "You're a high-profile target, Ms. Hale. Wealthy, powerful, recognizable. That makes you vulnerable in ways you may not have considered." Victoria thought about her penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, about the car service that picked her up every morning, about the restaurants and events she attended where her presence was noted in society columns. She'd built her life to be visible, to be known, to prove to everyone, including herself, that she'd made it. The idea that visibility could be weaponized against her had never occurred to her. "What happens now?" she asked. "We investigate. We question the suspects. We trace their connections and try to determine if there are additional threats." Detective Chen closed his notebook. "In the meantime, I'd recommend increased security. Private protection, changes to your routine, heightened awareness of your surroundings. I can't just hide in my apartment. I'm not suggesting you hide. I'm suggesting you be smart. He stood, his knees creaking slightly. You got lucky today, Ms. Hale. You happened to be on a date with someone who had the training and instinct to recognize a threat and neutralize it. Most people aren't that fortunate. He walked away, leaving Victoria alone with that truth settling over her like a weight. Lucky. She'd been lucky because the man she'd spent 30 minutes verbally eviscerating had saved her life. Across the cafe, past the police officers and crime scene technicians and remaining civilians giving statements, she could see Ryan. He was sitting on one of the velvet benches near the entrance, talking with a different detective. His posture relaxed, but his attention fully present. There was blood on his shoulder where his shirt was torn, but he'd refused the paramedics' attention, insisting other people needed it more. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the chaos and distance, and Victoria felt something crack in her chest. Not her armor, that had shattered the moment the guns came out, but something deeper. The foundation she'd built her entire adult life upon. The certainty that she was better than other people because she'd climbed higher, earned more, controlled more. Ryan Brooks had nothing she valued. No wealth, no status, no power in the world she inhabited. But when bullets were flying and death was a trigger pull away, his calloused hands and blue-collar background had been the only thing standing between her and violence. She looked away first, unable to hold his gaze, and found herself studying her own hands. They'd stopped trembling, she realized. The shock was fading, leaving behind something rawer and harder to process. Shame. Ms. Hale? A uniformed officer approached, young and nervous. We're going to need to clear the cafe for the crime scene investigators. Is there somewhere we can take you, home, or... I'm not going anywhere until I can speak with Ryan Brooks. The officer blinked. The civilian who engaged the suspects. The man who saved my life, Victoria corrected, and heard the edge in her voice. I'm not leaving until I've thanked him. But as she said it, she realized thanks wasn't enough. Couldn't be enough. How did you thank someone for absorbing violence meant for you? For stepping between you and death when you'd given them every reason to walk away? The officer nodded uncertainly. I'll let Detective Chen know. He retreated, and Victoria was left alone again with her thoughts and the growing realization that nothing about her life would be the same after today. The cafe around her looked different now. The beautiful fixtures seemed fragile, the expensive art on the walls irrelevant, the whole carefully curated atmosphere exposed as the illusion it was. Beauty and wealth couldn't stop bullets. Power couldn't disarm attackers. Success was meaningless when you were on your knees behind a counter, praying not to die. Ms. Hale? Another voice, softer this time. Victoria looked up to find a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed in a dark suit, her expression carefully sympathetic. I'm Dr. Sarah Winters with the department's crisis response team. I wanted to check in with you, see how you're processing what happened. I'm fine. The automatic response, the default shield. Dr. Winters sat down without being invited, her movements gentle and non-threatening. You were involved in a violent incident. You were targeted specifically by armed assailants. Your life was threatened. There's no universe in which you're fine right now, Ms. Hale. And pretending otherwise doesn't make you stronger. It just makes the crash harder when it comes. Victoria wanted to argue, to reassert control through denial, but something in the woman's tone stopped her. Not pity, she would have rejected pity, but understanding. What crash? The one that happens when your brain stops running on adrenaline and fear and starts actually processing what you survived. Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. You might have nightmares, panic attacks, difficulty sleeping or concentrating. You might find yourself jumping at loud noises or feeling unsafe in places you used to feel comfortable. These are normal responses to trauma, not signs of weakness. I don't have time for trauma, Victoria said flatly. I have a company to run, deals to close, hundreds of people depending on my decisions. I can't afford to fall apart. Then you can't afford not to deal with this, Dr. Winters countered. Because trauma doesn't wait for convenient moments. It doesn't care about your schedule or your responsibilities. If you ignore it, if you try to power through it like it's just another obstacle to overcome, it will find ways to express itself that you can't control. Trust me. I've seen it happen to people far more prepared than you. The words stung because they were true. Victoria had built her empire on control, on the ability to manage variables and eliminate weaknesses. But this feeling of fundamental vulnerability, of having stared into the void and survived only through another person's intervention, wasn't something she could manage or eliminate. What do I do? The question came out smaller than she intended. You acknowledge what happened. You talk about it. You let yourself feel the fear and anger and confusion instead of burying it under work and routine. Dr. Winters pulled a card from her pocket, handed it to Victoria. And you call me or someone like me, because processing trauma alone is like trying to set a broken bone without help. Possible, maybe, but the healing will be crooked and painful. Victoria took the card, her fingers closing around it automatically. I'll think about it. Do more than think. Dr. Winters stood, her expression still kind but firm. Because the people who survive trauma best aren't the ones who pretend it didn't happen. They're the ones who face it and decide to grow around it rather than be consumed by it. She walked away, leaving Victoria holding a business card she wasn't sure she'd ever use, and contemplating the uncomfortable reality that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have all the answers. Victoria? She looked up sharply to find Ryan standing a few feet away, Detective Chen beside him. Ryan's shirt was still bloodied, his jeans dusty from the floor, but his expression was gentle, concerned. The same expression he'd worn when he asked if she was hurt, when he'd put his body between her and guns, when he'd transformed from target of her cruelty into her protector. They said you wanted to speak with me, he continued quietly. Victoria stood, her legs steadier now, but her heart racing. What did you say to someone who'd done what he'd done? How did you apologize for cruelty when they'd responded to it with heroism? The words she'd used earlier, janitor, beneath her pore, echoed in her head like accusations. I wanted to thank you, she managed, for what you did, for saving my life. Ryan shook his head slightly. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. The words came out fierce, urgent. You could have run. When those men came in, when they pulled weapons, you could have hidden, protected yourself, let me deal with the consequences of whatever business dealings brought them here. Instead, her voice broke. You stepped between me and bullets. After everything I said to you, after I spent half an hour telling you that you were worthless and beneath me and not good enough, why did you do that? The cafe had gone quiet around them, other people moving away to give them privacy, but Victoria was barely aware of the space. All her attention was focused on Ryan's face, searching for answers she wasn't sure she deserved. Because it was the right thing to do, Ryan said simply. And because no matter what you said, no matter how cruel you were, you didn't deserve to die for it. I was horrible to you. The admission came out raw, stripped of her usual polish. Everything I said about your job, your life, your circumstances, I was trying to hurt you, to make you feel small because it made me feel bigger. I know. No anger in his voice, just acknowledgement. But hurt people, Victoria. I learned that a long time ago. You were scared, not of me, but of what I represented. Someone who reminded you of where you came from, who you used to be before you built all these walls to protect yourself. The accuracy of it stole her breath. How did you... Margaret told me about your childhood, about your mom, your dad leaving, the poverty you fought your way out of. Ryan's gray eyes held hers steadily. She thought it would help me understand you, and it did. I saw someone who'd been hurt so badly that she decided never to be vulnerable again, never to be the weak one, never to be looked down on. So you climbed as high as you could and made sure everyone below you knew their place. Tears burned in Victoria's eyes, hot and unwelcome. She hadn't cried in years, not at board meetings when men tried to intimidate her, not when deals fell through, not even at her mother's funeral 3 years ago. But here, in a cafe that smelled like gunpowder and fear, in front of a man she'd tried to destroy with words, the tears came anyway. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for what I said. You didn't deserve any of it. No, I didn't. Ryan's honesty was somehow kinder than false absolution would have been. But I understand why you said it, and I forgive you anyway. The forgiveness was almost worse than anger would have been. It implied a generosity of spirit that Victoria wasn't sure she possessed, a capacity for grace that her entire worldview had taught her to see as weakness. "The detective told me they came here for me," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her shame. "That this was targeted, that I might still be in danger." Ryan nodded slowly. "I heard. Are they providing protection?" "They recommended private security, changes to my routine." Victoria laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I don't even know what that means. I've spent my entire adult life being visible, being known. How do I just hide?" "You don't hide. You adapt." Ryan glanced around the cafe, his gaze taking in the exits and sightlines with that same tactical awareness she'd noticed earlier. "You vary your patterns, change your routes, stay alert to your surroundings. You stop being predictable." "You sound like you've done this before." A shadow crossed his expression, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Different context, but yeah, I've had to think about security before." Detective Chen, who'd been standing quietly to the side, stepped forward. "Mr. Brooks, we're going to need you to come down to the precinct for a more detailed statement. The district attorney's office will want to talk to you about the use of force, though given the circumstances, I don't anticipate any charges." "Charges?" Victoria's voice came out sharper than she intended. "He saved lives. He stopped a kidnapping. Why would there be any question of charges?" "Civilian use of force is always reviewed, Ms. Hale, especially when it results in injuries to the suspects." Detective Chen's tone was patient but firm. "It's standard procedure. Mr. Brooks understands that. Don't you, sir?" "Yeah, I understand." Ryan turned to Victoria, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "Are you going to be okay? Getting home, I mean. Do you have someone who can stay with you tonight?" The question was so simple, so practical, and it highlighted the fundamental isolation of her life. Did she have someone? Friends who were really friends, not business contacts? Family beyond the mother she'd buried? Anyone who would drop everything to sit with her in the aftermath of trauma? "I'll be fine," she said, and heard how empty it sounded. "I always am." Ryan studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sense that he could see straight through the lie. "If you need anything, if you feel unsafe or just want someone to talk to, Margaret has my number. Don't hesitate to call." He was offering help. After everything, he was offering to help her. "I don't deserve your kindness," Victoria said quietly. "Maybe not," Ryan agreed, and there was a hint of something in his voice, humor maybe, or just honest assessment. "But I'm offering it anyway. What you do with it is up to you." Detective Chen cleared his throat. "Mr. Brooks, we really need to go." Ryan nodded, but before he could leave, Victoria found herself reaching out, her hand catching his arm. He stopped, looking down at where her perfectly manicured fingers rested on his bloodied sleeve. "Your daughter," Victoria said, the words coming out before she'd fully formed the thought. "You mentioned you're a single father. Is someone watching her? Does she know you're okay?" Something shifted in Ryan's expression, softening, warming in a way she hadn't seen before. "My neighbor's got her, Mrs. Kowalski. She's probably making Emma dinner right now, helping with homework. Emma knows I had plans, but she doesn't know about this. I'll tell her something age-appropriate later." "How old is she?" 8. Pride colored his voice, unmistakable and genuine. "She's in 3rd grade, loves reading, hates math, wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up." Victoria tried to imagine it. Ryan Brooks going home to a daughter, helping with homework, making dinner in a small apartment in Queens. A life built around something other than profit margins and power dynamics. A life where success was measured in bedtime stories and parent-teacher conferences rather than board meetings and stock prices. "She's lucky to have you," Victoria said, and meant it. "I'm lucky to have her." Ryan gently extracted his arm from her grip, but the gesture wasn't unkind. "She's the reason I do everything I do. The reason I work, the reason I stayed in New York, the reason I—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "She's my whole world." "Mr. Brooks." Detective Chen's patience was clearly wearing thin. "I'm coming." Ryan looked at Victoria one more time. "Take care of yourself, Victoria. And if you meant what you said about being sorry, prove it by being kinder to the next person who doesn't meet your standards. Not because you owe me, but because cruelty doesn't protect you from anything. It just makes you lonelier. Then he was gone, walking away with Detective Chen, leaving Victoria standing in the ruins of the cafe and the wreckage of her certainty about who she was and what mattered. The next hour passed in a blur of statements and paperwork and official procedures. Victoria answered questions, provided contact information, accepted cards from various law enforcement officials who promised to keep her updated on the investigation. The cafe's owner appeared at some point, apologetic and shaken, offering compensation for her trauma, as if money could erase the memory of guns and violence. She declined absently, her mind elsewhere. When they finally released her, when she was allowed to leave the crime scene that had been her blind date, Victoria stood on the sidewalk outside the Meridian and realized she had no idea what to do next. Her driver had been sent home hours ago when she'd expected to catch a cab after quickly ending the date. The street was busy with evening traffic, people hurrying past with their phones and their coffees and their lives, completely unaware that just hours ago, someone had almost died behind those beautiful cafe windows. Victoria pulled out her phone and stared at it, her thumb hovering over various contacts. Her assistant, her head of security, the car service. All professional relationships, all transactional. No one she could call and say, "Something terrible happened, and I'm scared and I don't want to be alone." She scrolled further, found Margaret's name, and before she could second-guess herself, hit dial. "Victoria?" Margaret's voice came through worried and breathless. "Oh my God, I heard about what happened. Are you okay? Are you hurt? The news is saying there was an attempted kidnapping at the Meridian, and I knew you were meeting Ryan there, and I've been calling and texting, but you didn't answer, and I'm okay." Victoria's voice cracked on the words. "Physically, I'm okay. Margaret, I need to ask you something. Anything. What do you need? Why did you set us up?" The question came out plaintive, almost childlike. "You had to know we were completely incompatible. You had to know I'd be awful to him, so why did you do it?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could hear street noise in the background. Margaret was probably walking home from her office in the East Village, navigating the evening crowds. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Because I love you, Victoria. You're brilliant and driven and loyal to the people you care about. But you're also so lonely it breaks my heart. You've built this perfect, controlled life where no one can hurt you, and in the process, you've made it impossible for anyone to love you either." The words landed like physical blows, precise and devastating. "I thought if you met someone real," Margaret continued, "someone who'd lived through struggle and come out kind instead of cruel, someone who prioritized things that actually matter over things that just look impressive, maybe you'd see another way of being. Maybe you'd remember that the girl who fought her way out of poverty and into Colombia didn't do it to become the kind of person who looks down on others. She did it to have choices, to have freedom, to have a life where she didn't have to be afraid anymore." "I was horrible to him," Victoria whispered, her vision blurring with tears she could no longer hold back. "I said terrible things. And then he saved my life anyway." "That's who Ryan is," Margaret said softly. "He's a good man, Victoria, one of the best I know. And you know what? I think underneath all your armor and cruelty and fear, you're a good person too. You've just forgotten how to be one." Victoria closed her eyes, standing on a Manhattan sidewalk while evening descended and her whole sense of self crumbled around her. "I don't know how to fix this, any of it. I don't know how to be the person I was before I became this." "You start small," Margaret said. "You apologize when you're wrong. You help when you can. You choose kindness over cruelty, even when cruelty feels safer. And you stop measuring people's worth by their bank accounts or job titles or zip codes." He told me to prove my apology by being kinder to the next person who doesn't meet my standards. Victoria opened her eyes, watching the endless stream of humanity flowing past her. "I don't even know if I can do that. Being cruel is how I protect myself." "From what? From people getting close enough to hurt you? Victoria, you're already hurt. You're just hurting alone instead of with people who care about you." Margaret paused, and Victoria heard a siren in the background of the call, a sound that made her flinch despite the distance. "Come to my place. Don't go home to that empty penthouse. Come have dinner, drink too much wine, and let yourself fall apart with someone who's known you since before you learned to build walls." The offer was tempting, almost overwhelmingly so. But Victoria shook her head even though Margaret couldn't see it. I can't. Not tonight. I need to think, to process, to figure out who I am now that everything I believed about strength and safety just got proven wrong. Okay, Margaret said, but Victoria could hear the worry. But promise me you'll call if you need anything. And Victoria, what happened today? It wasn't your fault. Whatever business dealings brought those men there, you didn't deserve to be targeted. You didn't deserve to be scared. And you definitely didn't deserve to be validated in your belief that the world is dangerous and people are cruel. Ryan wasn't cruel, Victoria said quietly, even when I gave him every reason to be. He was kind and brave, and he saw right through me like I was transparent, like all my armor and success was just nothing. That's because to someone like Ryan, it is nothing, Margaret replied. He measures people differently than you do. And maybe that's the lesson here, that the things you've been chasing your whole adult life aren't the things that actually matter when bullets start flying. They said their goodbyes with promises to talk tomorrow, and Victoria stood alone again on the sidewalk. She pulled up her car service app, requested a pickup, and watched the little car icon on her screen navigate through Manhattan traffic toward her location. While she waited, she found herself pulling up Ryan's social media, an impulse she'd never have indulged before, too far beneath her notice. His profiles were sparse, mostly private, but she could see a few public photos. Ryan with his daughter, both of them grinning at a zoo. Ryan in running gear at what looked like a charity 5K. Ryan and an older woman, Mrs. Kowalski maybe, at some neighborhood event, both holding plates of food and laughing. A life built around people and connections and moments rather than achievements and acquisitions. A life she'd dismissed as small and meaningless. A life that, looking at it now, seemed infinitely richer than her own. The car arrived, sleek and black and anonymous. Victoria slid into the back seat, gave her address, and watched the city blur past her window. She lived in a penthouse on Central Park West, $16 million of carefully curated perfection with views that made visitors gasp, and enough square footage to house a family of 6 comfortably. She'd bought it as proof that she'd made it, proof that she belonged, proof that the scared little girl from the Bronx was dead and buried under layers of success. Tonight, the thought of returning to all that empty space made her chest tight with something that felt like panic. The security guard at her building greeted her by name, his expression professional and distant. The elevator rose smoothly through the floors, each number lighting up in sequence until she reached the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into her foyer, a feature that had seemed sophisticated when she bought the place but now felt isolating. Victoria stepped into her apartment and stopped, really seeing it for the first time in years. The furniture was beautiful and expensive and completely impersonal. The art on the walls had been chosen by a consultant based on investment value rather than aesthetic preference. The kitchen was chef quality and barely used. The second bedroom served as a home office, the third as a closet for her designer wardrobe. There was no evidence that anyone actually lived here. No photos, no personal touches, nothing that suggested warmth or history or love. It was a showpiece, a trophy, proof of success that felt in this moment like proof of failure. Her phone buzzed, a text from her head of security confirming that he'd received the police report and was implementing enhanced protocols starting tomorrow. Another text from her assistant, asking if she needed anything. A third from her company's PR director, warning her that the attempted kidnapping had made the news and they should prepare a statement. Nothing from anyone asking how she was, if she was scared, if she needed someone to just sit with her while she processed the fact that she'd almost died today. Victoria walked to her living room windows, pressing her palm against the glass and looking out over Central Park. 16 stories below, people were walking dogs and jogging and living lives that intersected with other lives in meaningful ways. And here she stood, alone at the top, realizing that she'd spent so much time climbing that she'd never stopped to ask if the summit was worth the isolation. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, and for the first time in years, Victoria let herself see it clearly. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the success story. Just a woman who'd been so terrified of being hurt that she'd hurt everyone else first. A woman whose cruelty had been armor and whose armor had become a prison. Ryan's words echoed in her head. Cruelty doesn't protect you from anything. It just makes you lonelier. He was right. God help her, the maintenance worker from Queens with his calloused hands and worn clothes had seen her more clearly in 30 minutes than anyone had in decades. And instead of using that insight to manipulate or wound her, he'd used it to save her life anyway. Victoria pulled out Dr. Winter's card, studying the number printed there. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she'd call and start the work of healing whatever was broken inside her. Tomorrow, she'd begin the impossible task of becoming someone different, someone better, someone who chose kindness over cruelty, even when cruelty felt safer. But tonight she'd let herself feel everything. The fear, the shame, the loneliness, the devastating recognition that money and power and control meant nothing when you were kneeling behind a counter praying for someone else to save you. Tonight, she'd let herself be broken. Because maybe, just maybe, breaking was the first step toward healing. Victoria didn't sleep that night. She lay in her king-sized bed with its 1,000 thread-count sheets and watched shadows move across her ceiling, her mind replaying the cafe scene on an endless loop. The sound of shattering glass, the weight of Ryan's hand pulling her down, the cold certainty in the gunman's voice when he said they'd come for her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the barrel of that weapon pointing at her hiding place, felt the paralyzing terror of knowing she was completely powerless. At 3 a.m, she gave up pretending and moved to her living room, curling up on her designer sofa with a blanket and her laptop. She told herself she was checking overnight market reports from Asia, reviewing quarterly projections, catching up on work. But her fingers betrayed her, typing Ryan Brooks into the search engine and pulling up what little public information existed about a man who'd saved her life. There wasn't much. No social media presence beyond those locked-down profiles she'd glimpsed earlier. A few mentions in local Queens newspapers, Ryan Brooks finishing a community 5K to raise money for the Children's Hospital, Ryan Brooks volunteering at a neighborhood cleanup day, Ryan Brooks coaching a youth soccer team. Small acts of civic participation that wouldn't register on anyone's radar but painted a picture of someone embedded in his community, contributing in ways that had nothing to do with wealth or status. She found one news article from 7 years ago, brief and buried in the archives. Local veteran returns home after medical discharge, begins new chapter in civilian life. No details about his service, no mention of what had caused the discharge, just a generic statement about transitioning to work and building maintenance and focusing on raising his daughter after his wife's death in childbirth. The article was 3 paragraphs long and treated like filler content, but Victoria read it 5 times, trying to piece together a life from fragments. Medical discharge. That meant injury, didn't it? Or psychological trauma, something that had ended his military career prematurely. But watching him move in that cafe, the precision, the controlled violence, the absolute certainty of someone who'd done this before, she couldn't imagine what would have forced him out. He'd moved like someone still in peak condition, still trained, still dangerous when he needed to be. What happened to you, she wondered, staring at the grainy photo accompanying the article. What did you see? What did you do? What broke you badly enough that they sent you home? And why, after everything, did you choose kindness? Dawn broke slowly over Manhattan, the sky lightening from black to gray to the pale gold of early autumn. Victoria watched it happen from her windows, still wrapped in her blanket, still searching for answers that Google couldn't provide. At 7, her phone started buzzing with messages. Her assistant confirming the day's schedule. Her head of security requesting a meeting to discuss enhanced protocols. Her PR director with a draft statement about yesterday's incident. The machine of her life grinding back into motion, pulling her back into the role she'd perfected over decades. She showered, dressed in armor, a Navy Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and prepared to face the world as Victoria Hale, CEO, billionaire, woman who had everything under control. But her hands shook slightly as she applied her makeup, and she had to redo her eyeliner twice because the wings wouldn't match. Small cracks in the facade that no one would notice but her. The car service arrived precisely at 8. Her new driver, younger than the regular one, clearly briefed by security, didn't attempt conversation beyond confirming her destination. They took a different route than usual, varied and unpredictable, part of those enhanced protocols she'd been told were necessary. Victoria watched familiar streets pass from unfamiliar angles and felt increasingly disconnected from her own life, like she was watching someone else's story unfold. Her office occupied the top 3 floors of a midtown tower, all glass and steel and commanding views. She rode the private elevator up, her assistant meeting her the moment the doors opened with coffee and a tablet full of urgent matters requiring immediate attention. Victoria took both automatically, falling into the rhythm of her days because it was easier than thinking about yesterday. "The board wants to meet this afternoon to discuss security concerns," her assistant said, walking beside her through the halls where employees straightened up at her approach and murmured greetings she barely acknowledged. "They're worried about liability, about whether the incident represents a broader threat to company operations. And the media requests have been overwhelming. Everyone wants a statement, an interview, details about what happened." "Tell the board 3 o'clock in the main conference room," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion dragging at her. "Tell the media we're referring all inquiries to NYPD and have no further comment at this time. Anything else?" Detective Chen called. "He said it wasn't urgent, but asked if you could call him back when you have a moment." Her assistant hesitated. "And Margaret Chen called 3 times. She said to tell you that you promised to check in, and she's not above showing up at your office if you don't call her back." Despite everything, Victoria felt her mouth twitch towards something almost like a smile. That was Margaret, bulldozing through boundaries in the name of friendship, refusing to accept dismissal or deflection. "I'll call her." Her office was exactly as she'd left it yesterday morning, before the blind date that had changed everything. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, abstract art that had been featured in Architectural Digest. The entire east wall was windows overlooking the city, and her west wall was lined with awards and photographs from various industry events. Victoria shaking hands with politicians and CEOs and other people who moved in her stratosphere. Evidence of success, of belonging, of mattering. It all felt hollow now. She sat behind her desk and stared at her computer screen without seeing it, her mind drifting back to the cafe, to Ryan's calm voice telling her to stay down, to the way he'd moved between her and danger without hesitation. That man, the one who disarmed attackers with his bare hands and negotiated with gunmen like he was discussing plumbing repairs. That man had a daughter he went home to, a life built around something other than proving his worth to a world that had tried to break him. Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed Margaret before she could second-guess herself. "About damn time," Margaret answered, skipping past pleasantries. "You didn't call last night. You didn't answer my text. I was 2 seconds away from filing a missing persons report." "I'm sorry. I couldn't." Victoria stopped, unsure how to explain the paralysis that had gripped her, the inability to reach out even to the one person who genuinely cared. "I needed time alone. Alone in that sterile penthouse, processing trauma by yourself, like you process everything else, with no support, no comfort, no human connection whatsoever." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "Victoria, you almost died yesterday. You don't have to be strong right now. You're allowed to fall apart." "I can't afford to fall apart. I have 347 employees depending on me, billions in assets under management, responsibilities that don't pause for trauma." But even as she said it, Victoria heard the hollowness of the words. Responsibilities to what? To whom? To shareholders and profit margins and a company that would replace her within days if she disappeared tomorrow? "How's Ryan?" The question came out before she could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. Margaret was quiet for a moment. "You really want to know?" "Yes." "He's okay, physically fine, a few bruises, but nothing serious. Spent 5 hours in the precinct last night giving statements, answering questions about the use of force. His daughter knows something happened. Hard to keep that kind of thing quiet when it's all over the news. But he told her a simplified version that wouldn't give her nightmares." Victoria closed her eyes, imagining Ryan sitting at a small kitchen table in Queens explaining to an 8-year-old girl that Daddy had helped some people in trouble, but everyone was safe now. The patience that would require the careful calibration of honesty and protection. She tried to remember if her own mother had ever shielded her from harsh realities and came up empty. Poverty didn't allow for sugarcoating. "Did he say anything about me?" The question was pathetic, needy, everything she'd spent her adult life learning not to be. But she needed to know if he hated her now, if saving her life had been pure instinct that he regretted in retrospect. "He said he hopes you're okay," Margaret replied carefully. "He said trauma affects everyone differently, and he hopes you have people around you to help you process it. He was worried about you, Victoria. Even after everything you said to him, he was worried about you." The kindness was almost worse than anger would have been. Victoria pressed her fingers to her eyes, feeling the prick of tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not here. Not in her office, where anyone could walk in and see weakness she couldn't explain. "I was horrible to him," she said quietly. "Everything you warned me not to do, every cruel instinct I promised myself I'd control, I did it all. I looked at him and saw everything I used to be, everything I've spent years running from, and I tried to destroy him for it." "I know," Margaret said gently. "Ryan told me some of what you said. And you know what he said after? He said you were scared, that you were protecting yourself the only way you knew how." He understood, Victoria. Even while you were attacking him, he understood why you were doing it. "How?" The word came out broken. "How does someone have that much grace, that much capacity for forgiveness? I think when you've survived real darkness, combat, loss, whatever Ryan went through that got him discharged, the small cruelties of daily life stop having the same weight." Margaret paused. Or maybe he's just a genuinely good person who understands that hurt people, and he chose not to take it personally. Victoria thought about the scars on Ryan's hands, the careful way he'd positioned himself in the cafe to maintain sightlines, the absolute certainty with which he'd moved when violence erupted. Whatever darkness he'd survived, it had forged him into someone capable of extraordinary things. Someone who'd chosen, despite everything, to be kind. "I don't know how to fix this," Victoria admitted. "Any of it. I don't know how to apologize adequately for what I said. I don't know how to process what happened in that cafe. I don't know how to go back to my life pretending everything's normal when nothing feels normal anymore." "Then don't," Margaret said simply. "Don't go back to normal. Use this as a catalyst for change. You've been given a second chance, Victoria. Not everyone gets that. Don't waste it by defaulting back to the same patterns that made you miserable in the first place." "I'm not miserable." But the protest was automatic, hollow. "Really? When's the last time you laughed? Actually laughed. Not that corporate networking smile you put on for board meetings and investor calls. When's the last time you did something just because it brought you joy, with no strategic purpose or networking opportunity attached? When's the last time you let yourself be vulnerable with another person and trusted them not to use it against you?" Victoria couldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. "That's what I thought," Margaret said softly. "You're not living, Victoria. You're surviving. You've been surviving for so long that you've forgotten there's supposed to be more to life than just not drowning. And yesterday, when those men came in with guns, that was life reminding you what's actually at stake." "I called Dr. Winters," Victoria said abruptly. "The crisis counselor from yesterday. I'm meeting with her this afternoon after my board meeting." She could hear Margaret smile through the phone. "That's good. That's really good. It's a start." "Just a start?" "Victoria, you've spent decades building walls and learning to see kindness as weakness. One therapy session isn't going to undo that. But it's a first step. And first steps matter." Margaret paused. "Can I tell you something that might make you uncomfortable? Haven't we crossed that bridge already? Ryan wants to see you." Victoria's breath caught. "What?" "He called me this morning. Asked if I thought you'd be open to meeting with him again. Somewhere public, somewhere safe, no pressure. He said there were things he wanted to say, things he couldn't say at the cafe with police and chaos everywhere." Margaret's voice gentled. "I think he wants to make sure you're really okay. And I think maybe he wants to give you a chance to apologize properly, on your terms, without an audience." "Why would he want that? Why would he give me another opportunity to hurt him?" "Maybe because he sees something in you worth giving a second chance to. Or maybe because that's just who Ryan is, someone who believes in people's capacity for growth and change." Margaret let that sink in. What should I tell him? Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from further humiliation by avoiding him entirely. But that was the old pattern, the defensive crouch she'd been living in for decades. And where had it gotten her? Alone in a penthouse. Friendless, except for Margaret, powerful but paralyzed, successful but suffocating. "Tell him yes," she said, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff. "Tell him I'll meet him. Whenever, wherever he wants. I owe him that much at least." "You owe him a lot more than that," Margaret said, but her tone was approving. "But it's a start. I'll let him know." They hung up, and Victoria sat alone in her office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline and trying to reconcile the woman she'd been yesterday morning with the woman she was becoming. The change felt seismic, foundational, like tectonic plates shifting beneath her carefully constructed life. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and calls and the endless demands of running a $9 billion investment firm. Victoria functioned on autopilot, her responses polished and professional, while her mind churned with thoughts of cafes and gunmen and a man with calloused hands who'd saved her life. Her staff noticed something off. She could see it in their careful glances, their tentative questions, but no one dared ask directly what had changed. At noon, her head of security appeared in her doorway. David Chen was ex-Secret Service, 48 years old, and had been protecting Victoria for 3 years with quiet efficiency. Today, his expression was grimmer than usual. "Ms. Hale, we need to talk about the threat assessment." Victoria gestured him in, and he closed the door before taking a seat across from her desk. He opened a tablet, pulled up several documents, and turned it to face her. "NYPD has identified the 3 suspects from yesterday's incident. All 3 have confirmed ties to a Russian organized crime syndicate operating out of Brighton Beach. The leader, the one your date subdued, is talking, trying to negotiate a deal with the DA's office." David's finger tapped the screen, highlighting a name. "He's confirmed that you were the specific target. This wasn't a robbery or random violence. They were there to kidnap you." The words sent ice through Victoria's veins despite her attempt to remain composed. "Kidnap me for what? Ransom?" "That's where it gets complicated." David scrolled through more documents. "The syndicate has ties to Volkov Industries, a Russian manufacturing conglomerate. Does that name mean anything to you?" Victoria's mind raced through years of deals and negotiations. "Volkov Industries, her eyes widened. 6 months ago. We leveraged a controlling interest in their American subsidiary and forced a restructuring that essentially bankrupted the parent company. They lost hundreds of millions in valuation." "And made it personal," David confirmed. "The syndicate has connections to the Volkov family. This wasn't about ransom money. This was about revenge. They wanted to make you disappear as a message. Hurt our business interests, and we hurt you." Victoria felt her hands begin to shake and clasp them together beneath her desk. "Are there others? Other attempts planned?" "Unknown. NYPD and FBI are investigating, but organized crime cells are compartmentalized by design. The men who came after you probably don't know if there are other teams, other plans." David's expression was carefully neutral. "Which means we have to assume you're still at risk until law enforcement can roll up the entire network. What are you recommending?" "Enhanced security detail, minimum of 2 bodyguards with you at all times, armored vehicle for transport, varied routes and schedules, limited public appearances. We should also consider relocating you temporarily until the threat is neutralized." The cage was closing in, Victoria realized. The freedom she'd taken for granted, to walk down a street, to sit in a cafe, to live her life without armed escorts and constant vigilance, was gone. Stripped away because she'd made business decisions that destroyed lives without ever considering the human cost. "How many people lost their jobs when we restructured Volkov's subsidiary?" she asked quietly. David blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "I don't have those numbers." "Find them." Victoria met his eyes. "I want to know exactly how many people were affected by that deal. How many lost their livelihoods because I decided their jobs were less important than our profit margin." "Ms. Hale, you can't blame yourself for—" "Can't I?" She stood abruptly, moving to her windows and staring out at the city below. "I made decisions that destroyed hundreds of lives and never once thought about the consequences beyond our bottom line. Someone out there hated me enough to pay criminals to kidnap me. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. That happens because I treated people like numbers on a spreadsheet instead of human beings with families and mortgages and lives that mattered." "You were doing your job," David said carefully. Running a business requires hard choices. It requires choices, Victoria corrected. Hard is subjective. What's hard for me, losing profit margins, disappointing shareholders, isn't even in the same universe as what's hard for the people whose lives I destroy. Losing a job, losing health care, losing the ability to feed your family. I've been playing chess with human lives and calling it business strategy. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What changed?" "I almost died yesterday," Victoria said simply. "And the only reason I didn't was because a man I'd spent 30 minutes verbally destroying decided my life was worth saving anyway. That kind of grace, that kind of fundamental human decency, doesn't come from my world, David. It comes from people who actually understand what it means to suffer and choose compassion anyway." She turned from the window to face him. "Implement your security recommendations. But I'm not hiding. I'm not going to let fear turn me into a prisoner any more than I already was. Whatever changes need to happen in my life, I want to face them head on, not barricaded in some safe house pretending the world outside doesn't exist." David nodded slowly, his respect visible despite his concern. "I'll coordinate with NYPD and keep you updated on the investigation. But Ms. Hale, please be careful. These are dangerous people with resources and motivation. Mr. Brooks may have saved you once, but there's no guarantee he'll be there next time." "I know," Victoria said quietly, "which is why I need to make sure there's something worth saving." The board meeting that afternoon was tense and brief. Victoria assured her directors that she was physically unharmed, that security measures were being implemented, and that the incident would not affect company operations. They asked pointed questions about liability and reputation management that she answered with her usual precision, but inside she felt hollow, going through motions that no longer held meaning. When the meeting ended, she excused herself and took the elevator down to street level where Dr. Winters kept her practice. The office was deliberately unmarked, discretion being paramount for a therapist who worked with high-profile clients. Victoria stood outside the door for a full minute before gathering the courage to knock. Dr. Winters answered immediately, her expression warm but professional. "Ms. Hale, I'm glad you called. Come in." The office was nothing like Victoria expected. She'd imagined something clinical and cold, all leather and diplomas. Instead, the space was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and furniture that invited you to sink in rather than sit at attention. Bookshelves lined one wall, personal photographs and plants occupied the other. It felt like someone's living room, intentionally non-threatening. "Have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Dr. Winters said, closing the door and ensuring privacy. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" "I'm fine." Victoria chose an armchair, maintaining posture and control even as her insides churned. "I've never done this before. Therapy, I mean. I don't know what I'm supposed to say." "There's no script," Dr. Winters assured her, taking a seat across from her with a notepad she didn't immediately open. "This is your space to process what happened yesterday and anything else you need to work through. Why don't we start with how you're feeling right now, in this moment?" Victoria wanted to lie, to say she was fine, handling everything perfectly. But she'd promised herself she'd try something different, and that started with honesty. "Terrified," she admitted quietly. "Not of the men who came after me. They're in custody. They can't hurt me now. But terrified that everything I've built my life on is meaningless. That I've wasted decades becoming someone I'm not sure I even like, let alone love. That I almost died without ever having really lived." Dr. Winters nodded slowly, her expression understanding without being pitying. "That's a significant revelation. What brought you to it?" "A man named Ryan Brooks," Victoria said, and then the whole story came pouring out. The blind date, her cruelty, his grace, the violence, and the aftermath. She talked for 40 minutes straight, barely pausing for breath, releasing words and emotions she'd been holding back for decades. Dr. Winters listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, but mostly just providing space for Victoria to unravel. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by confession, Dr. Winters spoke. "It sounds like yesterday's trauma forced you to confront truths you'd been avoiding for a long time. The attempted kidnapping was the catalyst, but the real crisis is existential. Who you are versus who you want to be." "I don't know who I want to be anymore," Victoria admitted. "I just know I can't keep being this person. This cruel, isolated, terrified person who pushes everyone away and calls it strength. Then we work on that, Dr. Winters said simply. We work on understanding where that behavior comes from, why you developed it, and how to build new patterns that serve you better. It won't be quick or easy, but you've already taken the hardest step, admitting you want to change. They talked for another 20 minutes about next steps, treatment approaches, the reality that healing trauma and changing lifelong patterns would take time and effort. Victoria left the office feeling simultaneously lighter and more burdened, like she'd opened a door she could never close but wasn't sure she wanted to. Her phone buzzed as she waited for her car. A text from Margaret. Ryan can meet you tomorrow evening, 6 p.m. at the Riverside Park running path near 83rd Street. He says it's public, well-lit, and gives you an easy out if you need one. Let me know if that works. Victoria stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply field. Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours to prepare for a conversation that terrified her more than armed gunmen had. But she'd promised herself she'd try. She typed back. Tell him I'll be there. Victoria arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early, her new security detail trailing at a discreet distance that still felt suffocating. The evening air carried the first real bite of autumn, and she pulled her cashmere coat tighter as she walked the path Ryan had chosen. Joggers passed in steady streams, cyclists navigated around pedestrians, and families with strollers enjoyed the last hour of daylight. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the woman in designer clothes walking past them had almost been kidnapped 2 days ago. She'd changed outfits 3 times before leaving her penthouse, finally settling on dark jeans and a simple cream sweater under her coat. Nothing that screamed wealth or power, nothing that would create the same distance she'd used as a weapon during their first meeting. Her hair was down rather than pulled back in its usual severe style, and she'd gone lighter on the makeup. Small changes that felt monumental, like shedding armor she wasn't sure she could function without. At precisely 6 o'clock, she saw him. Ryan was sitting on a bench overlooking the Hudson, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket, his posture relaxed but alert. Even from a distance, she could see the way he tracked his surroundings, that same tactical awareness she'd witnessed in the cafe. He noticed her approach and stood, his expression carefully neutral. "Victoria," he said as she reached him. "Thanks for coming." "Thank you for agreeing to see me again." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "After everything I said, you had every right to refuse." "I don't operate on rights," Ryan replied quietly. "I operate on what seems right, and this seemed right." He gestured to the bench. "Want to sit, or would you prefer to walk?" "Walk," Victoria decided. Movement felt safer somehow, less confrontational than sitting face to face. "If that's okay with you." They started down the path together, maintaining a careful distance between their bodies, their pace slow and unhurried. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence filled with the sounds of the park, children laughing, dogs barking, the distant horn of a boat on the river. Finally, Victoria broke the quiet. "I've been trying to figure out how to apologize to you. I've drafted speeches in my head, practiced what I'd say, but nothing feels adequate for what I did." "Then don't make a speech," Ryan said. "Just talk to me, like I'm a person, not an audience you're trying to impress or a subordinate you're managing." The gentle correction stung precisely because it was true. "I'm not sure I know how to do that anymore. Talk to people like they're people, I mean. I've spent so long viewing every interaction as strategic that I've forgotten how to just be human." "That's sad," Ryan said, and there was no judgment in it, just honest observation. "And exhausting, I'd imagine. Always calculating, always performing, never letting your guard down. It's safer." Victoria watched a little girl chase pigeons, her laughter bright and uncomplicated. "If you never let anyone in, they can't hurt you. They also can't love you, can't know you, can't give you anything real." Ryan glanced at her, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Is that really safety, or is it just a different kind of prison?" Victoria felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. "I said terrible things to you, about your job, your life, your worth as a person. I looked at you and saw everything I've been running from: poverty, struggle, vulnerability. And I tried to destroy you for reminding me of it. There's no excuse for that, no justification. I was cruel because I was scared, and that's not good enough. No, it's not, Ryan agreed, and the honesty was somehow kinder than false absolution would have been. You hurt me, not because I believed what you said. I know my worth doesn't come from my bank account or job title, but because I saw someone in pain lashing out, and I couldn't help. That's what hurt. Watching you self-destruct and knowing you'd never accept help from someone you considered beneath you. I don't consider you beneath me. The words came out fierce, urgent. Not anymore. Maybe not ever, if I'm being honest. I think some part of me recognized immediately that you had something I'd lost. Integrity, peace, genuine connection to other people. And I hated you for it. Because if you could have those things while working in maintenance and living in Queens, then what did that say about all my wealth and success? They passed under a tree dropping early leaves, golden and red against the darkening sky. Ryan was quiet for several steps, processing her words. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. It says that you've been chasing the wrong things. Money and power aren't inherently bad, Victoria, but when you make them your only measure of worth, when you sacrifice everything else to get them, connection, kindness, vulnerability, joy, you end up rich and miserable. And that's not success. That's just expensive loneliness. My therapist said something similar yesterday, Victoria admitted. She said I've been surviving instead of living, that I've built such high walls to protect myself that I've trapped myself inside them. You're seeing a therapist? Ryan's tone shifted, warming slightly. That's good. That takes courage. Does it? It feels like weakness, like admitting I can't handle things on my own. Asking for help when you need it is one of the strongest things a person can do, Ryan said firmly. It's pride that makes you think you have to suffer alone. Strength is recognizing when you're in over your head and reaching out. Victoria thought about that, about the military training Ryan must have received, the brotherhood of soldiers who relied on each other in combat. Is that something you learned in the service? His stride faltered almost imperceptibly. Among other things. Margaret said you were medically discharged. I'm not asking you to share anything you don't want to, but Victoria hesitated, then pushed forward. The way you moved in that cafe, the speed, the precision, the complete lack of fear. That wasn't standard military training. What were you? Ryan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun cast his face in shadow, making his expression hard to read. Why do you want to know? Because I can't reconcile the man who saves lives with the man who clearly knows how to end them. Victoria met his gaze steadily. Because everything about you suggests violence as a familiar companion, but everything I've witnessed suggests you've chosen peace. And I want to understand how someone does that. How you live with whatever darkness you've seen and still choose kindness. For a long moment, Ryan said nothing. Then he started walking again, and Victoria fell into step beside him. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful, each word chosen with precision. I was Special Forces. Multiple deployments, operations I can't discuss. Things I did that I'll carry for the rest of my life. He kept his eyes forward, watching the path ahead. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. And then one day I wasn't anymore. Something broke inside me. Not physically, though the doctors found enough damage to justify the discharge. But mentally, emotionally, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't be that person. What changed? Victoria asked softly. I watched a friend die because of a decision I made. A good man with a wife and a baby girl he'd never met. Ryan's jaw tightened. I'd made dozens of decisions that got people killed. That was the job. Those were the stakes. But this one was different. This one was because I was arrogant, because I thought I knew better than the intelligence, because I let pride override caution, and he paid for it. The pain in his voice was so raw that Victoria felt it in her own chest. I'm sorry. Me too. Ryan's hands clenched briefly at his sides, then released. I came home after that. Medical discharge gave me an honorable out, and I took it because I couldn't trust myself anymore. Couldn't trust my judgment, couldn't trust that I wouldn't get more people killed. My wife was 8 months pregnant, and I thought I'd have a chance to be different, to be a father, to build a life that created things instead of destroying them. But she died, Victoria said quietly, remembering the article she'd found. Complications during childbirth. Emma lived. My wife didn't. His voice cracked slightly on the words. I held my daughter for the first time in a hospital room where my wife's body was still warm, and I made a promise that I'd be the person Emma needed, that I'd choose peace over violence, kindness over anger, connection over isolation, that I'd prove every day that life has value, that people matter, that the darkness I'd lived in didn't have to define me. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face now, no longer trying to hide them. How do you do it? How do you carry all that and still function? Still choose to help people who don't deserve it? Because everyone deserves it, Ryan said simply. That's what I learned in the darkness, that everyone is carrying something, fighting battles you can't see, struggling with demons they didn't choose. And the only thing that makes any of it bearable is other people choosing to be kind anyway, choosing to help even when it's hard, to forgive even when it hurts, to see the best in each other, even when we're showing our worst. He stopped walking again, turning to face her fully. The tears on her face caught the last light of sunset, and his expression softened. You asked me in the cafe why I saved you after everything you said. That's why. Because I've been the person in darkness who needed someone to choose kindness. I've been the one who didn't deserve help, but got it anyway. And that grace, that unearned, undeserved grace, it saved my life. So when I see someone drowning in their own pain and lashing out, I don't take it personally. I just try to throw them a lifeline. Even when they're trying to pull you under with them, Victoria whispered. Especially then. Ryan reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was so tender, it broke something inside her. Because that's when they need help most. Victoria closed her eyes against the overwhelming emotion, feeling the weight of his compassion like a physical thing. When she opened them again, Ryan had stepped back, giving her space, his expression patient and understanding. I want to be better, she said, the words coming from somewhere deep and true. I want to be the kind of person who chooses kindness over cruelty, who sees people as people instead of obstacles or tools. But I don't know how. I've spent so long being the other way that I don't know how to change. You start small, Ryan said, echoing Margaret's words from the day before. You make one better choice, then another, then another. You catch yourself before the cruelty comes out and choose silence instead. Then you choose neutrality. Then eventually, if you keep working at it, you choose kindness. It's not a switch you flip, it's a muscle you build. What if I fail? What if I try and I'm still just me? Then you try again. He said it with such certainty, such unshakable belief in human capacity for change, that Victoria almost believed it. Victoria, you're not broken beyond repair. You're just someone who learned the wrong lessons from a hard life. You can unlearn them. It'll take time and effort and probably more therapy than you want, but you can do it. They started walking again, the path ahead lit by street lamps flickering to life as darkness settled over the park. Victoria's security detail maintained their distance, shadows in her peripheral vision, but she'd almost forgotten they were there. Can I ask you something? Ryan said after a moment. Anything. What do you actually want? Not what you think you should want, not what success is supposed to look like. What brings you joy? What makes you feel alive? Victoria opened her mouth to answer and found she couldn't. The question was so simple, so fundamental, and she had no answer. What brought her joy? When had she last felt truly alive, connected, present in her life rather than just moving through it? I don't know, she admitted finally, and the words felt like a confession. I used to love music, playing piano, going to concerts, losing myself in sound, but I gave that up years ago because it wasn't productive, wasn't advancing my career. I used to read fiction, getting lost in stories. But that became a waste of time compared to reading market reports and business journals. She stopped, realizing the pattern. I used to do a lot of things that made me happy until I decided happiness was less important than success. That's heartbreaking, Ryan said quietly. It's practical. But even as she said it, Victoria knew it was a lie. There was nothing practical about being so successful you forgot how to feel joy. Nothing strategic about climbing so high you lost sight of why you started climbing in the first place. When's the last time you played piano? Ryan asked. I don't even own one anymore. Sold it when I moved to the penthouse because it didn't fit the aesthetic. The admission felt shameful somehow, like she'd sold off a piece of her soul for decorative consistency. Ryan pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then showed her the screen. It was a community center in Queens, advertising open piano hours every Thursday evening. Come with me tomorrow night. They have 3 pianos that anyone can use, no questions asked. Come play something. Remember what it feels like to do something just because it makes you happy. Victoria stared at the screen, her heart racing. The community center was in Jackson Heights, Ryan's neighborhood. Going there would mean stepping completely out of her world and into his, being vulnerable and visible in a space where her usual armor wouldn't work. It terrified her. Okay, she heard herself say, I'll come. Ryan smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the tactical awareness, warming the careful neutrality, revealing the man beneath the warrior. Good. Emma will be there with me. She has an art class that runs at the same time. Fair warning, she's going to ask you a million questions because that's what 8-year-olds do, and she has no filter whatsoever. The thought of meeting his daughter sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Victoria. What did you tell her about me? About what happened? I told her I helped some people who were in trouble, and one of those people was a woman named Victoria who was very scared but very brave. Ryan's expression grew serious. I didn't tell her about the things you said to me. That's between us. She doesn't need to know that part. The grace of it, the complete, undeserved grace, nearly undid her. Why are you being so kind to me? Because kindness is a choice, Ryan said simply. And I choose it. Every day, in every interaction, I choose it. Not because people deserve it, but because I want to be the kind of person who offers it anyway. They'd completed a full loop of the path and were back near where they'd started. The park was darker now, the street lamps casting pools of yellow light along the walkway. Victoria could see her car waiting in the distance, her security detail ready to whisk her back to her safe, sterile penthouse where she could process this conversation alone. But she didn't want to be alone anymore. Ryan? She stopped walking, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Thank you. Not just for saving my life in the cafe, but for this, for giving me a second chance I didn't earn, for seeing something in me worth salvaging. I don't think you need salvaging, Ryan replied gently. I think you need remembering. Remembering who you were before the world taught you to be hard. Remembering that vulnerability isn't weakness and kindness isn't naive. Remembering that the things that make us human, connection, compassion, love, those are the things that actually matter when everything else falls away. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper with an address written on it. This is the community center. Tomorrow at 7. Emma's class ends at 8, so you'll have an hour with the piano before she ambushes you with questions about literally everything. Victoria took the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. What if I'm terrible? I haven't played in years. Then you'll be terrible in a room full of people who won't judge you for it. Ryan's smile returned, gentle and encouraging. That's the beautiful thing about community spaces. Everyone's there to grow, not to perform. You're allowed to be imperfect. The concept was so foreign to Victoria's worldview that it took her a moment to process it. A space where imperfection was acceptable, where failure didn't mean judgment, where you could just... When had she last experienced anything like that? I'll be there, she promised, tucking the paper carefully into her coat pocket. And Ryan, I'm going to keep trying, to be better, to be the kind of person who deserves the kindness you've shown me. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm going to try. That's all anyone can do, Ryan said. Try, fail, try again. That's how growth works. That's how healing works. One imperfect step at a time. They parted ways then, Ryan heading toward the subway station and Victoria toward her waiting car. As she slid into the back seat and gave her driver instructions, she caught herself watching Ryan's retreating figure in the side mirror. He walked with that same quiet confidence, that same awareness of his surroundings. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't noticed in the cafe amid the chaos and fear. Peace. Despite everything he'd survived, everything he carried, Ryan Brooks had found peace. Victoria wanted that. wanted it with a desperation that surprised her in its intensity. Not his life. She wasn't naive enough to think she could or should replicate someone else's journey, but that sense of groundedness, of knowing who you were and being okay with it, of choosing principles over profit, people over power, connection over control. The drive back to her penthouse took 30 minutes, traffic heavy with evening commuters. Victoria spent the time staring out the window at the city she'd conquered, seeing it differently now. All these people in their cars and on the sidewalks, each carrying their own stories, fighting their own battles, living lives she'd never considered because they didn't intersect with her pursuit of success. How many of them worked in buildings she owned? How many had lost jobs because of her business decisions? How many looked at her tower and felt the same mixture of awe and resentment she'd once felt looking at the wealthy from the outside? Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "How did it go?" Victoria typed back slowly, choosing her words carefully. "He's extraordinary, and I'm going to try to deserve another chance." Margaret's response came immediately. "That's all he's asking for. And Victoria, I'm proud of you. I know this is hard." Harder than anything she'd ever done, Victoria thought. Harder than building a billion-dollar company, than facing down hostile boards, than making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Because this required something she'd spent decades learning not to do: being vulnerable, being honest about her flaws, being willing to change the fundamental patterns that had governed her entire adult life. Back in her penthouse, Victoria poured herself a glass of wine and stood at her windows overlooking Central Park. The view was spectacular, worth every penny of the $16 million she'd paid for it. But looking at it now, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pride, and no sense of accomplishment. Just the hollow recognition that she'd traded everything that mattered for a view that impressed other people. Her eyes drifted to the empty corner where her piano used to sit, before she'd decided it didn't fit the minimalist aesthetic her designer had recommended. She'd loved that piano, had played it almost daily before her career consumed everything else. Bach, Chopin, Debussy, hours lost in music that made her feel connected to something larger than herself. Tomorrow she'd play again, not perfectly, not impressively, just honestly. In a community center in Queens where no one knew her name or cared about her net worth, where she could be just Victoria, not Victoria Hale the CEO, not Victoria Hale the billionaire, not Victoria Hale who'd almost been kidnapped. Just a woman who used to play piano and was trying to remember who she was before success became a cage. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Victoria almost declined it. Years of training said unknown numbers were either solicitations or problems, but something made her answer. "Ms. Hale?" A young voice, female, nervous. "This is Officer Jennifer Park with NYPD. I was one of the first responders at the cafe incident. Do you have a moment?" "Of course." Victoria moved away from the windows, her heart rate picking up. "Has something happened? Is there new information about the threat?" "No, nothing like that." Officer Park hesitated. "I'm calling because this is going to sound strange, but I've been thinking about you since that day, about how you looked when we arrived, how scared you were, and I wanted to tell you that what you experienced was trauma, real, legitimate trauma. And you shouldn't try to just push through it like nothing happened." Victoria sat down slowly on her couch, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "I'm seeing a therapist." "Good. That's really good." Relief colored the officer's voice. "I've seen too many people try to tough it out alone, and it never ends well. PTSD doesn't care how successful or strong you are. It hits everyone who goes through that kind of fear. Can I ask why you're calling? You must have dozens of cases, hundreds of people you've helped. Why check on me specifically?" Officer Park was quiet for a moment. "Because of what Mr. Brooks said to me while we were taking a statement. He said he was worried about you, that you'd been struggling even before the incident, and that this might break you if you didn't have support. He asked me to follow up, to make sure you were accessing resources. He cared enough to think about your well-being while he was being questioned about use of force." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes again. Even when dealing with his own aftermath, his own potential legal troubles, Ryan had been thinking about her, making sure she had support he wasn't sure she'd seek on her own. "That sounds like him," Victoria said softly. "He's a good man. I've been doing this job for 6 years and I've never seen a civilian handle a situation like that with such control and compassion." Officer Park paused. The way he talked to those suspects before things got physical, he was trying to save them from themselves, trying to give them an out even though they'd come there to hurt someone. That's rare. Most people in that situation would want revenge, would want to hurt them back. He just wanted everyone to survive. He told me earlier today that everyone deserves kindness, Victoria said, that it's a choice he makes, even when it's hard. Well, he's practicing what he preaches. Officer Park's tone warmed. Anyway, I won't keep you. I just wanted to make sure you were taking care of yourself. And if you need anything, resources, referrals, just someone to talk to who understands trauma response, please don't hesitate to reach out. You have my number now. They said their goodbyes, and Victoria sat alone with this new evidence of Ryan's character. He'd been worried about her, had taken time during his own crisis to make sure she had support, had seen past her cruelty to the wounded person underneath, and cared anyway. How did someone become that? How did you survive darkness and violence and loss and come out choosing compassion? Maybe tomorrow at the community center, if she found the courage to ask, Ryan would help her understand. Or maybe she'd just play piano and let the music remind her of who she used to be before she built walls so high she forgot what sunshine felt like. Either way, she was going. She'd promised, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Hale was going to keep a promise that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with becoming someone worth knowing. The night stretched ahead, quiet and vast. Victoria finished her wine, changed into comfortable clothes, and did something she hadn't done in years. She ordered pizza. Not from some high-end restaurant that delivered artisanal flatbreads, but from a regular neighborhood place that Margaret had recommended years ago. While she waited for delivery, she pulled up music on her phone, Chopin's Nocturnes, pieces she used to play, and let the notes fill her empty penthouse. It wasn't enough. The music was beautiful, but hollow coming from speakers, lacking the physical connection of fingers on keys, the vibration of strings resonating through wood. Tomorrow, she promised herself, tomorrow she'd feel that connection again. The pizza arrived, and Victoria ate it sitting on her floor rather than at her dining table, the informal posture feeling almost rebellious. It was objectively mediocre pizza, too greasy, the crust slightly burnt, but she savored every bite because it was normal. Human. Something a person ate rather than a CEO performing success. As midnight approached, Victoria pulled out Dr. Winter's card and sent an email requesting a second session as soon as possible. Then she lay in her enormous bed and stared at her ceiling, replaying the conversation with Ryan over and over. His pain, his grace, his absolute certainty that change was possible if you were willing to do the work. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she could become someone who chose kindness, who measured worth by character rather than bank accounts, who understood that the things that made life meaningful had nothing to do with the things she'd spent decades chasing. Tomorrow she'd take another step toward that person. Tomorrow she'd play piano in Queens and meet an 8-year-old girl and exist in a space where none of her usual armor would protect her. Tomorrow she'd be vulnerable, imperfect, and human. And maybe, just maybe, she'd discover that those things weren't weaknesses to hide, but strengths to embrace. Victoria stood outside the Jackson Heights Community Center at 6:45 the next evening, her heart hammering against her ribs in a way that board meetings and hostile negotiations had never managed. The building was modest, red brick, probably built in the 70s, with hand-painted signs advertising ESL classes and youth programs, and so far removed from her usual world that she felt like she'd crossed into another dimension. Her security detail had protested the location, citing inadequate exits and crowd control concerns, but she'd overruled them. David had compromised by insisting on a thorough advance sweep and positioning 2 guards inside the building itself, disguised as regular patrons. Victoria had agreed because choosing her battles seemed wiser than fighting every protective measure, but she'd made it clear she wouldn't be surrounded by obvious security. Not here, not in Ryan's world. She walked through the front doors into a lobby that smelled like floor wax and coffee, with bulletin boards covered in flyers for everything from yoga classes to tenant rights meetings. A gray-haired woman at the reception desk looked up and smiled warmly. "Can I help you, dear?" "I'm here for the open piano hours," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "A friend told me about them." "Wonderful. 3rd floor, music room. Take the elevator or stairs, whichever you prefer." The woman's smile didn't falter, didn't show any recognition despite the fact that Victoria's face had been all over the news 3 days ago. Here, she was just another person wanting to play piano. Victoria took the stairs, needing the extra moments to prepare herself. The stairwell was clean but worn, the kind of institutional space that had seen thousands of people pass through and absorbed all their stories into its walls. By the time she reached the third floor, her palms were sweating. The music room was larger than she'd expected, with 3 upright pianos spaced around the perimeter and a small seating area in the center. 2 of the pianos were occupied, a teenage boy working through scales with intense concentration, and an elderly man playing something classical that Victoria didn't recognize. The third piano sat empty, waiting. Victoria approached it slowly, her fingers trembling as she lifted the fallboard to reveal the keys. They were yellowed with age, some chipped, the finish worn smooth by countless hands. Nothing like the pristine Steinway she'd sold, but something about the imperfection made it more approachable. This piano wasn't for showing off, it was for playing. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The muscle memory was still there, her fingers finding position automatically even after years away. She started with something simple, a scale, then a basic arpeggio, feeling her way back into the physical language of music. The sound was imperfect. The piano was slightly out of tune, and her technique was rusty, her fingers fumbling over passages she used to play effortlessly. But beneath the imperfection was something she'd forgotten: joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy in creating sound, in feeling the keys respond to her touch, in letting music flow through her without calculation or performance. She transitioned into Chopin, one of the nocturnes she'd loved as a teenager. Her playing was halting, uncertain, missing notes and rushing tempos, but she kept going. The teenage boy glanced over once but returned to his scales without judgment. The elderly man finished his piece and started another, creating a layered soundscape of different styles and skill levels, coexisting without competition. Victoria lost track of time, moving from Chopin to Debussy to half-remembered pieces she'd learned in college. Each note felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd buried, each phrase a reminder that she'd once been someone who valued beauty over profit, feeling over strategy, art over acquisition. "You're really good." Victoria's hands froze on the keys. She turned to find a little girl standing beside the piano, maybe 4 feet tall, with Ryan's gray eyes and dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She wore jeans with paint stains and a t-shirt that declared "Future Marine Biologist" in bold letters. Her smile was gap-toothed and completely unself-conscious. "Thank you," Victoria managed, her throat tight. "You must be Emma. How did you know?" The girl's eyes widened with the delighted surprise of children who haven't yet learned that adults talk about them. "Your dad mentioned you. I'm Victoria. The lady from the cafe." Emma's whole face lit up. "Dad said you were really brave when the bad people came. He said you stayed calm even though you were scared." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at this characterization. So generous, so completely unearned. "Your dad was the brave one. He saved my life." "He does that sometimes," Emma said matter-of-factly, as if life-saving was a casual hobby. "He saved a cat from a tree last month, and before that he helped Mrs. Kowalski when she fell on the stairs. He says helping people is what makes life meaningful." She climbed onto the bench beside Victoria without asking permission, her presence comfortable and unself-conscious in the way only children managed. "Can you play something happy? You looked sad when you were playing before." The honest observation, delivered without cruelty or manipulation, hit Victoria harder than any of her own harsh self-assessments. "I'm not very good anymore. I haven't played in a long time." "That's okay. You don't have to be good at something to enjoy it." Emma said this with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old who hadn't yet learned that adults measured everything by performance metrics. "Dad says trying is more important than being perfect. He's really bad at cooking, but he tries anyway. And sometimes it's actually good." Victoria found herself smiling despite the emotion churning in her chest. "What would you like to hear?" "Something that makes you happy. Not something you think you should play, something you want to play." The wisdom in those words, coming from a child who probably couldn't define metacognition but understood it intuitively, made Victoria's breath catch. What made her happy? What did she love playing before music became another thing to master rather than enjoy? Her hands found the keys almost automatically, starting into a piece she hadn't thought about in 15 years. Claire de Lune, Debussy's Meditation on Moonlight, with its gentle cascading notes and melancholic beauty. Her technique was far from perfect, her pedaling uncertain, but the emotional truth of the piece came through anyway. She played it for herself, for the teenager still inside her who'd once played this in a school recital and felt like she could touch the moon. Emma listened quietly, her small body still beside Victoria on the bench, and when the final notes faded, she said simply, "That was beautiful. You looked happy playing it." "I was," Victoria admitted, surprised by the truth of it. "I'd forgotten how this felt, how music could make you feel." "Dad says people forget important things when they get too busy," Emma said sagely. "That's why he makes us have dinner together every night even when he's tired, and why we go to the park every Sunday even when it's cold. He says the important things are the ones you have to protect from the busy things." Before Victoria could respond, she heard footsteps behind them. She turned to find Ryan standing in the doorway, still in his work clothes, worn jeans and a hospital maintenance shirt, with an expression that was equal parts surprised and pleased. "Emma, I thought you were finishing your art project," he said, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "I did finish. Miss Rodriguez said it was good enough to display in the hallway." Emma beamed with pride. "And then I heard piano music and came to investigate. And look, I found Victoria. She plays really pretty, Dad. You should hear her." "I'd like that," Ryan said quietly, his eyes meeting Victoria's across the room. "If she's willing to play for an audience." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from judgment and potential failure. But she looked at Emma's eager face, at Ryan's gentle encouragement, and found herself nodding. "What would you like to hear?" "Something that matters to you," Ryan said, moving to sit in one of the chairs near the piano. Something true. The request was more intimate than he probably realized, asking her to be vulnerable through music in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Victoria turned back to the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys as she searched for the right piece. What mattered to her? What truth could she tell through music that her words couldn't express? She started playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement, with its somber, searching quality. It was a piece about longing, about beauty tinged with melancholy, about the eternal human desire to touch something transcendent even while remaining grounded in imperfection. Her playing was far from perfect, fumbling over the triplets and rushing the tempo in places, but the emotional core came through. She poured into it all the loneliness of the past decade, all the fear from the cafe, all the desperate hope that she could become someone different. When she finished, the room was silent except for the distant sound of the teenage boy still working through his scales. Victoria sat with her hands in her lap, not brave enough yet to turn around and face Ryan's reaction. "That was incredible," Ryan said softly. "Thank you for sharing that." Victoria finally turned to look at him and found his expression open and honest, with no trace of judgment or false flattery. He'd heard what she was trying to say through the music. She could see it in his eyes. "Can I show you something?" Emma asked suddenly, already sliding off the bench. "I made a painting in class today, and I want you to see it before Dad makes us go home." Victoria glanced at Ryan, who nodded his permission. "Go ahead. I need to talk to Miss Rodriguez about next week's schedule anyway." Emma grabbed Victoria's hand with the casual confidence of children who hadn't yet learned to fear rejection and pulled her down the hallway to a bright classroom covered in student artwork. She stopped in front of a painting that was still drying on an easel, abstract swirls of blue and purple and silver that somehow evoked water and sky simultaneously. "It's the ocean at night," Emma explained proudly. "We're studying marine biology and science, and Ms. Rodriguez said we should paint what we learn about. I painted all the creatures that live in the deep parts where it's dark, the ones with bioluminescence that make their own light because there's no sun. Isn't that cool? They're beautiful even though nobody usually sees them." Victoria stared at the painting, at this 8-year-old's instinctive understanding that beauty could exist in darkness, that creatures could create their own light when the world offered none. "It's more than cool," she said quietly. "It's wise. Dad says I'm wise beyond my years, but I think that's just what adults say when kids notice things they wish they'd noticed." Emma tilted her head, studying Victoria with those same gray eyes her father had. You're sad a lot, aren't you? I can tell because you smile with your mouth but not your eyes, except when you were playing piano. Then your eyes smiled too. The observation was so accurate, so devastatingly honest, that Victoria had to sit down on one of the small classroom chairs before her legs gave out. Yes, she admitted, because lying to a child who saw that clearly felt impossible. I've been sad for a long time. I think I forgot I was allowed to be happy. Everybody's allowed to be happy, Emma said, with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never questioned their right to joy. That's like a basic rule of being human. Dad says happiness is a choice you make every day, even when things are hard. He says he chooses it for me, so I know it's possible. Your dad is a very special person, Victoria said. I know. Emma moved closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Can I tell you a secret? Of course. Dad's been sad too, since my mom died. Not all the time, but sometimes I catch him looking at her picture with that same smile that doesn't reach the eyes thing. But he's been less sad lately, especially after he met you. He came home from that date, and even though something scary happened, he was talking about how people could change and how important second chances were. I think maybe you reminded him that new things could be good things. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical force. She'd been so focused on her own transformation, her own journey from cruelty to kindness, that she hadn't considered how their meeting might have affected Ryan. But of course it had. He was human, not a saint, and he'd been carrying his own grief and trauma for years. Emma? Ryan's voice called from the hallway. Time to pack up. Victoria, you too, if you're ready. They walked back together, Emma chattering about her week, a spelling test she'd aced, a boy in her class who'd shared his lunch when she'd forgotten hers, a book about dolphins she was reading. Victoria listened, fascinated by the richness of this child's life, the way she moved through the world collecting kindness and distributing joy like it was her personal mission. Ryan was waiting in the hallway, holding Emma's backpack and art supplies. Thank you for playing, he said to Victoria, and for letting Emma ambush you with questions. I hope she wasn't too overwhelming. She was perfect, Victoria said honestly. Wise beyond her years, just like you said. Emma beamed at the compliment, then tugged on Ryan's sleeve. Dad, can Victoria come have dinner with us? Please. I want to show her my fish tank and my rock collection and my books about marine biology. Ryan's expression showed surprise and something else. Hesitation, maybe, or concern about putting Victoria in an uncomfortable position. Emma, Victoria probably has plans. She's a very busy person with important things to do. Actually, Victoria heard herself say, I don't have plans, and I'd love to see your collections, if your dad doesn't mind the intrusion. Ryan studied her face for a long moment, searching for something, sincerity, maybe, or confirmation that she wasn't just being polite. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. Okay, but I'm warning you now. Our apartment is small and dinner is going to be spaghetti from a box because I forgot to defrost the chicken. Nothing fancy. Fancy is overrated, Victoria said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. They walked together through Jackson Heights, Emma between them holding both their hands and narrating the neighborhood like a tour guide. She pointed out Mrs. Kowalski's window. She's from Poland and makes the best pierogi, and the bodega where they bought milk. Mr. Kim always gives me a free candy, but don't tell Dad. And the park where Ryan coached soccer on Saturdays. It was a community, Victoria realized. A real community where people knew each other's names and looked out for each other and created safety through connection rather than security systems. Ryan's apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up, and he was right. It was small. Maybe 800 square feet total, with a living room that flowed into a kitchen, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for their furniture, and 1 bathroom that had probably been last updated in the 90s. But it was clean and lived in, with Emma's artwork on the fridge and photos covering every surface, and a bookshelf overflowing with everything from military history to children's books about ocean life. Sorry about the mess, Ryan said, moving quickly to clear Emma's homework off the coffee table. We weren't expecting company. It's not messy, Victoria said, and she meant it. The apartment was full of life and love and evidence that people actually lived here. But it wasn't messy. It was home in a way her $16 million penthouse had never been. Emma dragged her immediately to the fish tank, a 20-gallon setup with colorful fish and live plants, and explained in detail the care requirements for each species. Then came the rock collection, organized by type and labeled in careful 8-year-old handwriting. Then the bookshelf, where Emma pulled out her favorites and insisted Victoria at least look at the illustrations. Through it all, Ryan worked in the kitchen, boiling pasta and heating jarred sauce with practiced efficiency. Victoria watched him move in the small space, his movements economical and sure, and thought about the contrast between his calloused hands handling military weapons and those same hands now carefully measuring noodles for his daughter's dinner. "Emma, go wash your hands," Ryan called. "Dinner's almost ready." Emma scampered off, and Victoria found herself alone with Ryan in the small kitchen. He was stirring the sauce, his back to her, and something about his posture suggested vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "Emma's been talking about meeting you since I told her about the cafe. She has this idea that anyone her dad thinks is important must be someone special." "And do you?" Victoria asked quietly. "Think I'm important?" Ryan turned to face her, the spoon still in his hand. "I think you're someone in the middle of becoming who you're meant to be. And I think that's one of the bravest things a person can do. Choose to change, even when change is terrifying." "I'm terrified constantly now," Victoria admitted. "Every interaction, every choice, every moment. I'm second-guessing everything I used to do automatically. It's exhausting." "That's how you know you're doing it right," Ryan said gently. "Real change is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. You're literally rewiring your brain, creating new patterns over decades of conditioning. Give yourself credit for trying, even when it's hard." Emma returned, hands still damp from washing, and they sat down to dinner at a small table that barely fit 3 people. The spaghetti was exactly what Ryan had promised. Basic, from a box, nothing fancy. But eating it in this small apartment with Ryan and Emma felt more nourishing than any Michelin-starred meal Victoria had consumed in the past decade. Emma dominated the conversation, asking Victoria questions about everything from her favorite color to whether she'd ever seen a whale in real life. Ryan interjected occasionally to redirect when the questions got too personal, but mostly he just watched, his expression content in a way that made Victoria's chest ache. This was what mattered, she realized. Not the money or the power or the success she'd spent her life chasing. This, sitting around a table with people who cared about each other, sharing simple food and honest conversation, creating connection in the midst of ordinary life. This was what she'd sacrificed in her climb to the top, and seeing it now felt like watching someone display treasure she'd thrown away as worthless. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Victoria her bedroom. A small space dominated by posters of sea creatures and a bookshelf overflowing with marine biology texts meant for much older readers. On the nightstand was a framed photo of a young woman with Emma's smile and dark curly hair. "That's my mom," Emma said, following Victoria's gaze. "She died when I was born, but Dad makes sure I know about her. He says she was brave and kind and really good at making people laugh. He says I got her smile." "You did," Victoria said softly, studying the photo. The woman looked young, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of open, joyful expression that suggested she'd never learned to guard her heart. "She was beautiful." "Dad says she would have liked you," Emma said thoughtfully. "He says she always believed people could change if they wanted to badly enough. She used to work with kids who got in trouble, helping them find better paths. Dad says she saw the best in everyone, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." The description was so similar to Ryan's own philosophy that Victoria wondered how much of his worldview had been shaped by the woman he'd loved and lost. Had he learned grace from her, or had they found each other because they already shared it? "I think I would have liked her too," Victoria said honestly. They returned to the living room to find Ryan had cleaned up from dinner and was making tea. He offered Victoria a cup, and they sat together on the small couch while Emma sprawled on the floor with a book about dolphins, reading contentedly in that way children did when they felt safe and loved. "This is nice," Ryan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Having someone here who isn't afraid of our normal. Emma hasn't stopped smiling since you agreed to come." "Neither have I," Victoria admitted. "This is the most relaxed I've felt in years, maybe ever. There's no performance here, No calculation about what I should say or how I should present myself. I can just be. That's what home should feel like, Ryan said. Safe enough to be imperfect, comfortable enough to be honest, warm enough to be yourself. Victoria looked around the small apartment again, seeing it differently now. Not as poverty or limitation, but as sufficiency. Ryan and Emma had what they needed: shelter, food, love, connection. And they'd chosen to build a life around those essentials rather than constantly reaching for more. There was wisdom in that, a kind of peace she'd never achieved despite having everything money could buy. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said after a moment. "Anything. Why did you really agree to that blind date? Margaret set it up, but you could have said no. You had to know from her description that I'd be difficult, that we came from completely different worlds. So why did you say yes?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his tea cooling in his hands. "Honestly? Because Margaret was worried about you. She said you'd become someone she barely recognized, that you'd isolated yourself so completely that she was afraid you'd wake up one day and realize you'd traded your humanity for success. She thought maybe meeting someone who'd chosen differently, who'd had opportunities to climb that ladder and walked away from it, might remind you that other paths existed." "You had opportunities?" Victoria asked, surprised. "After my discharge, I had offers: private security firms, defense contractors, consulting positions that would have paid 6 figures easy. I had skills people wanted and were willing to pay for." Ryan's voice was matter-of-fact, without regret. "But those jobs required travel, long hours, the kind of commitment that would have meant leaving Emma with babysitters more than I was with her. And I'd already missed so much: her first steps, her first words, all those early moments because I was deployed. I wasn't going to miss any more." "So you chose maintenance work," Victoria said, understanding blooming. "I chose presence over prestige, time over money. A life built around what matters instead of what impresses." Ryan met her eyes. "No regrets?" "Not a single one. Emma knows her dad is there. She knows she's my priority. And when she's grown and looking back on her childhood, she won't remember that we lived in a small apartment or that I worked in maintenance. She'll remember that we had dinner together every night and that she was loved unconditionally." Tears streamed down Victoria's face, no longer trying to hide them. "I want that," she whispered. "Not your life specifically, but that certainty, that peace with your choices, that ability to measure success by what actually matters instead of what the world says should matter." "Then build it," Ryan said simply. "One choice at a time. You can't erase the past decade overnight, can't undo the patterns in a week. But you can start choosing differently. Start measuring your days by connection instead of profit. Start evaluating your decisions by whether they make you proud rather than whether they make you rich. Start building a life that will matter when you're looking back from the end." "I don't know if I'm brave enough," Victoria admitted. "You face down armed gunmen," Ryan pointed out. "You're sitting in a stranger's apartment in Queens eating boxed spaghetti when you could be in a Michelin restaurant in Manhattan. You played piano imperfectly in front of people who could have judged you. You're braver than you think. You're just scared of a different kind of danger, the danger of being vulnerable and real and human." Emma chose that moment to look up from her book. "Are you crying because you're sad or because you're happy?" she asked Victoria with characteristic directness. "Both," Victoria said honestly. "Sad for the time I wasted, happy for the possibility of something different." "Dad says crying is just feelings leaking out because there's too many to hold inside," Emma said sagely. "He says it's okay to leak sometimes. It means you're human." The simple wisdom of it, delivered by an 8-year-old who understood emotions better than most adults, made Victoria laugh through her tears. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said to Ryan. "I know," he said, pride evident in his voice. "She's my greatest achievement. Everything else I've done, everything I might do in the future, none of it will ever matter as much as being her dad." Victoria stayed another hour, talking with Ryan while Emma read and occasionally interjected with observations or questions. They talked about everything and nothing: Victoria's therapy progress, Ryan's work at the hospital, Emma's upcoming school science fair, the investigation into the attempted kidnapping that was still ongoing. The conversation flowed naturally, without the strategic maneuvering Victoria usually employed in social situations, and she realized this was what friendship felt like. Real friendship, built on honesty rather than utility. When she finally stood to leave, Emma hugged her with the unselfconscious affection of children who decided you were worth loving and simply did it. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Maybe you could teach me piano? Dad says I should learn an instrument, but he's terrible at music, so he can't help." Victoria looked to Ryan, who shrugged. "Only if you want to, no pressure." "I'd love to," Victoria said, and meant it completely. "Maybe next week? Same time?" "It's a date," Emma said, then giggled at her own choice of words. "Not like a date, like a friend date, because we're friends now, right?" "Right," Victoria agreed, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in longer than she could remember. "We're friends." Ryan walked her down to the street where her car was waiting, the security detail visible in the shadows but maintaining their distance. The night air was cold, autumn settling into early winter, and Victoria pulled her coat tighter. "Thank you," she said. "For tonight, for your kindness, for showing me what a life built on the right priorities looks like. You didn't have to do any of this." "Neither did you," Ryan pointed out. "You could have walked away after the cafe, gone back to your old life, and pretended none of this happened. But you chose differently. You chose to try. That matters, Victoria." She looked up at him. This man who'd saved her life and was now saving her in a different way, showing her through example that change was possible, that kindness wasn't weakness, that measuring success by human connection rather than financial achievement wasn't naive but wise. "I'm going to keep trying," she promised, "to be better, to choose differently, to build something that matters." "I know you will," Ryan said with quiet confidence. "And when you stumble, because you will stumble, we all do, you'll get back up and try again. That's how growth works." Victoria wanted to hug him, to express physically the gratitude words couldn't capture, but she wasn't sure if that would be welcome or appropriate. Ryan made the decision for her, pulling her into a brief, warm embrace that felt like coming home. "See you next week," he said as he released her. "Emma's going to be talking about this all weekend. Fair warning, she'll probably have 17 questions prepared by then." "I look forward to it," Victoria said, and climbed into her car. The drive back to Manhattan felt longer than usual, the distance between Queens and her penthouse representing more than just miles. She was traveling between worlds, between who she'd been and who she was becoming, and the transition was jarring. By the time she reached her building, she felt hollowed out and filled up simultaneously. Her penthouse felt even emptier than before, after the warmth of Ryan's apartment. Victoria walked through rooms that cost more than most people's houses and felt nothing but the ache of absence. No photos on the walls, no evidence of life lived, no warmth or connection or love. Just expensive furniture arranged for maximum aesthetic impact and minimum emotional resonance. She pulled out her laptop and opened a document she'd been working on for the past 2 days. A list of changes she wanted to make, both in her business and her life. Some were small. Weekly therapy sessions, regular calls with Margaret, learning to play piano again. Others were more substantial, reviewing all of Hale Investments' restructuring deals from the past 5 years to understand the human cost of her decisions, implementing new ethical guidelines for future acquisitions, establishing a fund to support workers displaced by corporate restructuring. The biggest change sat at the bottom of the list, the one she'd written and deleted a dozen times before finally leaving it there. Consider whether running Hale Investments still serves who I want to become, or if it's just serving who I used to be. She wasn't ready to act on that question yet, wasn't sure she'd ever be ready. But asking it felt important, acknowledging that the empire she'd built might not align with the person she wanted to become. That success measured by billions might not be success at all if it came at the cost of everything that made life meaningful. Victoria added a new item to the list. Teach Emma piano. Start next week. Show up consistently, be patient. Remember that perfection isn't the point. Connection is. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Ryan said dinner went well. I'm proud of you, Victoria. This change, this willingness to be vulnerable and try something different, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen you do. Victoria typed back. It doesn't feel brave. It feels terrifying and uncomfortable and like I'm walking through the world without skin. But it also feels right. More right than anything has felt in years. Margaret's response came immediately. That's exactly what brave feels like. It's not the absence of fear, it's choosing growth despite the fear. Keep going. You're doing better than you think. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm established itself in Victoria's life. She saw Dr. Winters twice a week, unpacking decades of trauma and defensive patterns with a thoroughness that left her exhausted but hopeful. She returned to the community center every Thursday, playing piano with increasing confidence and decreasing perfection seeking. She had dinner with Ryan and Emma most Sundays, sometimes at their apartment and sometimes at modest restaurants in Queens where no one recognized her or cared about her net worth. Slowly, carefully, she began implementing changes at Hale Investments. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't unfire the workers or restore the companies she'd gutted, but she could change how her firm operated going forward. She established an ethics board to review all major acquisitions, implemented protocols to minimize workforce disruption, created transition programs for displaced workers. Her board pushed back. These changes would impact profit margins, but Victoria held firm. Some things, she told them, were more important than maximizing returns. 3 months after the cafe incident, Detective Chen called with news. The investigation had rolled up the entire criminal network, including the people who'd ordered her kidnapping. The Volkov family patriarch was facing charges, and the immediate threat to Victoria's safety had been eliminated. She could, if she chose, return to her previous level of security and routine. Victoria thanked him and then called David to reduce her security detail. Not eliminate it entirely. She wasn't naive enough to think her visibility made her completely safe, but enough to breathe again, to move through the world without constant surveillance. 4 months after the cafe, Victoria sold her penthouse. She bought a modest apartment in Brooklyn Heights, still nice, still safe, but human-sized, with actual neighbors and a kitchen she might actually cook in. Margaret helped her move, and Ryan and Emma came for the housewarming, bringing homemade cookies that were only slightly burnt and a potted plant that Emma insisted would make the apartment feel less lonely. 6 months after the cafe, on a cold February evening, Victoria played piano at the community center while Emma sat beside her, slowly learning the basics. Ryan sat in his usual chair, reading a book, but glancing up occasionally to watch them, his expression content. And Victoria realized with startling clarity that this was happiness. Not the performance of it, not the optimization of it, not the achievement of it, just the simple, present experience of it. After Emma's lesson, after Ryan had taken his daughter home to start her bedtime routine, Victoria walked through the Queens streets toward the subway. She'd sent her driver home hours ago, choosing to travel like a normal person rather than be ferried around like a visiting dignitary. The February cold bit at her face, and somewhere nearby someone was cooking something that smelled like cumin and garlic, and a group of teenagers passed her speaking rapid Spanish interspersed with English. She was just another person in the city, anonymous and unremarkable, and it felt like freedom. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Emma wants to know if you're free next Saturday. She's competing in her school science fair and would love to have you there. No pressure, but she specifically requested your presence in her list of people to invite. You're between me and Mrs. Kowalski, which is apparently prestigious placement. Victoria smiled, typing back quickly. I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for anything. She paused, then added, thank you for everything. For saving my life in more ways than one, for showing me what really matters, for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. Ryan's response took a few minutes, and when it came, it was simple. Everyone deserves second chances, and third and fourth, and as many as it takes to become who they're meant to be. You're doing the work, Victoria. You're choosing differently. That's all anyone can ask. Victoria descended into the subway, her MetroCard in hand, surrounded by tired commuters heading home after long days. She thought about the version of herself who'd sat in that cafe 6 months ago, armed with cruelty and desperate to maintain distance from anyone who threatened her carefully constructed worldview. That woman had been successful by every external measure, but she'd been dying inside, slowly suffocating under the weight of her own defenses. The woman riding this subway train was less successful by those same measures. She'd scaled back her role at Hale Investments, delegating more and attending fewer high-profile events. She'd lost some board seats and turned down speaking opportunities that would have elevated her profile. By the standards of her old life, she was diminishing, fading, becoming less. But by the standards that actually mattered, By measures of connection and growth and human warmth, she was becoming more present, more honest, more capable of love and vulnerability and joy, more fully human in all its messy, imperfect, beautiful complexity. The subway car was crowded, and Victoria found herself standing next to a young woman struggling to manage a crying toddler and multiple shopping bags. Without thinking, without calculating the optics or considering what it meant about her image, Victoria bent down and picked up a bag that had slipped from the woman's grasp. "Thank you so much," the woman said gratefully, exhaustion evident in her face. "I'm sorry, he's overtired and I couldn't get childcare today, so I had to bring him shopping and everything just became too much." "Don't apologize," Victoria said gently, and meant it. "Parenting is hard. You're doing great." The woman's eyes filled with tears at this small kindness from a stranger, and Victoria understood. Sometimes the smallest gestures mattered most because they reminded you that you weren't alone, that other people saw your struggle and chose compassion over judgment. She rode with the woman for 3 more stops, helping with bags and even entertaining the toddler with silly faces that made him laugh. When the woman got off at her stop, she thanked Victoria again, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what that meant to me. Thank you for seeing me." Victoria watched her go, carrying her child and her burdens, navigating her life with grace under pressure. A year ago, Victoria wouldn't have noticed her. 6 months ago, she might have noticed but would have considered helping beneath her station. But today she'd chosen kindness reflexively, without calculation, because it was becoming her default setting rather than her aspiration. She was changing, slowly, imperfectly, inconsistently, but genuinely. The work was ongoing, would probably always be ongoing, but the direction was clear. Away from cruelty and isolation, toward kindness and connection. Away from measuring worth by bank accounts, and toward measuring it by character and compassion. Victoria emerged from the subway into Brooklyn Heights as snow began to fall, soft and silent in the streetlight glow. Her apartment building was modest but warm, with neighbors who said hello in the elevator and a doorman who asked about her day. She climbed the stairs to her floor, no private elevator here, and unlocked her door to a space that was smaller and simpler, but infinitely more alive than her penthouse had ever been. On her kitchen counter was the plant Emma had given her, thriving despite Victoria's inexperience with care. Beside it was a framed photo, the only one in her apartment, from Emma's science fair. Emma stood between Ryan and Victoria, beaming with pride while holding her blue ribbon, and all 3 of them looked genuinely happy. No performance, no calculation, just human connection captured in a moment. Victoria made tea and sat by her window, watching snow transform Brooklyn Heights into something magical. She thought about the cafe, about gunmen and terror, and the moment her life could have ended. She thought about Ryan's calm voice telling her to stay down, his body shielding hers, his absolute certainty that every life, even the life of someone who'd been cruel to him, was worth protecting. She thought about Emma's gap-toothed smile and her wisdom about bioluminescent creatures making their own light in darkness. About Dr. Winter's patient guidance through the difficult work of healing. About Margaret's steadfast friendship through years when Victoria had given her little reason to stay. About the young mother on the subway and the simple grace of being seen. All of it, every moment, every choice, every small act of kindness given and received, was building into something new. Not a finished product, not a completed transformation, but a life in progress. A life being lived rather than performed, experienced rather than optimized, felt rather than calculated. Victoria pulled out her phone and opened a new message to Ryan. "I've been thinking about what you said that night in the park, about how I needed to remember who I was before the world taught me to be hard. I think I'm starting to remember. But more importantly, I think I'm discovering who I can become. Thank you for believing that was possible when I couldn't." His response came quickly. "The person you're becoming was always there, Victoria. She was just buried under a lot of protective layers. I'm proud of you for doing the excavation work, even when it's painful. Emma and I are lucky to have you in our lives." Lucky. He considered himself lucky to know her, despite everything, despite the cruelty of their first meeting, despite her wealth and his lack of it, despite the vast differences in their worldviews and life choices. He saw her, really saw her, and chose friendship anyway. Victoria finished her tea and prepared for bed, her heart full in a way she was still learning to recognize and accept. Tomorrow she had therapy, then a board meeting where she'd present her revised ethical guidelines, despite knowing they'd face resistance. Tomorrow night, she'd have dinner with Margaret and actually be present for the conversation, rather than mentally reviewing work while pretending to listen. This weekend, she'd go to the community center and play piano imperfectly, while Emma practiced beside her, and Ryan would sit nearby reading his book and occasionally looking up to smile at them both. Tomorrow and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead, she'd keep choosing differently. Keep building a life measured by what mattered rather than what impressed. Keep growing toward the person she wanted to be instead of defending the person she used to be. It wouldn't be easy. The old patterns would resurface. The cruelty would try to reassert itself as protection. The fear would whisper that vulnerability was weakness and isolation was safety. But she'd have tools now, therapy and friendship, and the living example of Ryan and Emma showing her what a life built on the right priorities looked like. She'd have second chances and third chances, and as many chances as it took. And most importantly, she'd have the memory of that cafe, of staring down death and discovering that when everything else fell away, when money and power and status meant nothing, the only thing that mattered was human connection. The only thing worth dying for was other people. The only thing worth living for was love. Victoria turned off the lights and lay in her bed, listening to Brooklyn sounds outside her window, cars and voices, and the gentle whisper of falling snow. Somewhere across the river, Ryan was tucking Emma into bed and kissing her goodnight, creating the kind of moment that wouldn't make headlines or impress anyone, but would matter more than all of Victoria's billions ever could. And somewhere inside herself, in the parts she'd buried under decades of defensive cruelty, Victoria felt something unfamiliar, but welcome. Peace. Not perfection, not completion, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was finally, after all these years, moving in the right direction. Toward light, toward love, toward life, toward home.